Chapter 1728. A loud sword sound rang in his ears, and his divine soul felt as if it was being pierced by a sharp sword. Every pore on his body was tingling with pain. The sky-shaking clan's Emperor Yuan, who was stepping on Qi Ziqing, felt as if there were sharp swords hanging all over his body. He had no doubt that once he stepped on Qi Ziqing, he would be pierced by thousands of swords at the same time. In particular, the murderous aura in Qin Hao's eyes was even more terrifying than the sword intent around him. Thinking of the battle on the Dao Mountain, the sky-shaking clan's Emperor Yuan felt a chill run down his spine. His heart trembled violently, and he subconsciously took a few steps back. Li Chuji of the Dao sect was a terrifying existence who fought against Song Yao and Yuan Shitao by himself. Although Song Yao was at the 9th stage of the Dao realm, if the other party wanted to kill, none of the Imperial Lords present would be able to protect him. Cowardly, frightened by a single glance. This was the might of the Tribulation Sword Emperor. Coward, step on him if you dare. Qi Ziqing cursed angrily, got up, and dragged the seriously injured Qi Yuan to Qin Hao's side. When he shrank behind Qin Hao, Qi Ziqing only felt that this figure was the safest place in the entire divine wilderness. Relying on the might of the Imperial Lord, you bullied the weak of my clan. You, Li Chuji, are really a hero, really awe-inspiring. Song Yao smiled and clapped his hands. He glanced at the sky-shaking clan's Emperor Yuan indifferently, without any intention of blaming him. Song Yao had personally experienced how strong Li Chuji was. Naturally, the sky-shaking clan's Emperor Yuan couldn't withstand the other party's might. You flatter me. I'm not as capable as you, Emperor Song Yao. You're the dignified overlord of the East Sea, yet you bully the people of Western Liang, whose orthodoxy has declined. You're the real hero. Qin Hao replied with a smile. The two Imperial Lords seemed to be praising each other, but in fact, they were both insulting each other. The Imperial Lords present couldn't help but sigh. You flatter me. I don't dare to bully you. I just let the servants of my clan exchange a few moves with the Taoists of Western Liang. Song Yao's implication was that the fight between the two sides was fair. You're in a good mood. Since that's the case, you should also spar with the experts of the Sky Shaker clan with profound Emperor Dao. Make sure that all of them come and spar. Don't miss a single one. Qin Hao's eyes fell on Shou Wuk and Su Jin. Wang. Ferocious monarch light swept across the area. Not only the two of them, but the monarchs of the sacred palace behind Qin Hao also released their monarch will with all their might. Waves of terrifying qi shook the entire Sky Shaker race's palace. Seeing this scene, Song Yao's expression changed. Li Chuji, did he really dare to make a move? And them, they've made their move too. Qi Ziqing pointed at the group of East Ocean itinerant cultivators who participated in the siege. He remembered all of their faces. Swordmaster, it has nothing to do with us. Puchi, Puchi, Puchi. Shou Wuk formed a sword seal with his hand. Following a series of sounds of flesh being pierced, sword lights crisscrossed back and forth. More than 10 itinerant cultivators from the 100 islands of the East Ocean couldn't resist in time and fell to the ground. Each of them had at least 7 or 8 sword lights on their bodies. Their wrists, ankles, and martial meridians were all severed. In an instant, the training hall was filled with wails. You brought this upon yourselves. Shuo Xiu looked coldly at the Penglai cultivators who were screaming and rolling on the ground. He didn't notice that so many people had stepped into the Emperor Dao after the Relic Divine City opened. Many of them came from the Ji clan's palace alone, and there were probably more from the other 4 realms. The training hall fell into chaos. After crushing the group of monarchs with one move, Shou Wuk, Su Jin, Tian Yun, and the others directly pounced on the dumbfounded Sky Shaker clan's monarchs. Shou Wuk's sword Dao was extremely strong. He was in the 8th stage of Dao validation and was unstoppable among the Imperial Masters. Su Jin landed on the ancient Ape Island. In order to look forward to reuniting with Qin Hao, he had been cultivating desperately for more than 10 years. He wasn't like Yi Shuaihan and the others, whose fighting spirit had been worn away by ease and comfort. With sea sand and the many golden ancient apes as powerful opponents, he was often threatened to be swallowed alive. It was like living in a nightmare every day. Although he had suffered a lot, his Emperor Dao was incomparably firm, and his realm didn't fall by much. Not long ago, on the second day of his reunion with Qin Hao, he advanced from the 6th stage of Dao validation to the 7th stage. He had 2 more Emperor rings than Qian Ning. The 2 of them took the lead in suppressing Sky Shaker clan's Emperor Yuan, and the people of the Holy Palace joined in. It was as if the scene of Qi Ziqing and the others being crushed was repeated again. But this time, it was Song Yao's subordinates who were defeated. In a few breaths, no one from the Gui clan could still stand. They were all lying on the ground, and pairs of eyes full of anger and humiliation looked fiercely at Qin Hao. They looked very much like Xiaogua and the others when they were powerless. Li Chuji, Song Yao's eyes spewed fire, and blue veins popped out on his fists. Just now, Swanee roared and rushed toward Qin Hao, but he was pressed to the ground by the other party's telekinesis, just like how he suppressed Fa Zhao before. At this moment, Song Yao's heart trembled fiercely. The anger in his heart was about to explode. Li Chuji actually dared to make a move. Qin Hao ignored Song Yao's anger and walked forward step by step. His gaze fell on Aku, who was on the platform. Just as he passed in front of Song Yao and was about to pass by her, Song Yao's foot stomped heavily on the ground. 9 extremely powerful Emperor's rings swept out, and the terrifying heaven burial will fill the entire space. It seemed to have transformed into an invisible wall that blocked Qin Hao's path forward. Buzz! The blood-red, demonic flames tumbled and roared, and bursts of dragon roars shook the heavens and the earth. The Imperial Lords who were watching the battle could clearly feel that there were 2 Emperors' wills fighting in the space. They saw that when Qin Hao passed by Song Yao, his body only paused for a moment before he immediately stepped forward. Crash! There seemed to be an invisible shattering sound, and the heaven burial will that filled the entire space was suddenly annihilated as Qin Hao stepped forward. Sister-in-law, you've suffered. Qin Hao stepped onto the platform and bent over to help Aku up. Looking at the striking handprint on her face, the killing intent in his eyes grew colder. Aku's eyes were filled with tears. Although she was crying, she smiled and nodded. She followed Qin Hao down the platform and walked straight past Song Yao. But this time, Aku was not afraid at all. She even summoned the courage to look at Song Yao. She suddenly felt that this imperial lord with fluttering snow-white hair was nothing more than this. However, when Qin Hao brushed shoulders with Song Yao again and was about to take his people back to the southern border district, he was stunned. His gaze was attracted by an inconspicuous corpse on the ground. The corpse's head had exploded, and it was wearing an extremely old set of Qin people's armor. The style of the armor. Boom! As if struck by lightning, Qin Hao's body trembled slightly. He bent over to Song Yao's feet and turned the corpse over. On the corpse's chest, he saw a worn and almost deformed sign with the words Qin Guizhu written on it. At this moment, a scene quickly flashed through Qin Hao's mind. It was not long after he was reborn in Akita Town. It was the day after he won the hunt for his family and tore up the engagement. Young master, and these people will be the guards of our east courtyard from now on. The old servant Lu Yu laughed heartily and pointed to the men moving things in the courtyard. Hello, young master. The 6 men put down their things and stood in front of Qin Hao in high spirits. They lined up in a line and bowed respectfully. The scene was like yesterday. The faces of the men flashed in front of his eyes. Soon, Qin Hao recognized one of them. Qin Guizhu was the first person to follow him. He had followed him since he protected Shao Han in the east courtyard. Chapter 1729. When a weak person grew up, they had to bear too much burden and experience too much, so they had no choice but to become stronger. When one got used to killing for a long time, they would eventually become numb and cold-blooded to the withering of life. However, there would always be some people, some words, some things, and even some forms of address that could touch the softest part of one's heart. These were precisely the times when one was at their weakest and most difficult. Young master. It was a very ordinary form of address. Qin Guizhu was a very ordinary person. At the moment, his voice and face were becoming clearer and clearer in Qin Hao's mind. Your family? He is very brave, but unfortunately, he overestimated himself. Song Yao said, a floating ant trying to shake a mountain? Overestimating yourself? Qin Hao lifted his head and stood up slowly. He welcomed Song Yao's warm smile as dazzling white gold emperor's rings were released one after another. In an instant, an extremely terrifying emperor intent swept out, and the Sky Shaker race's palace trembled violently. With a loud explosion, the platform behind Song Yao was turned to dust. Who did it? Qin Hao asked coldly. Is it important? Song Yao asked. In his opinion, a mere Yuan venerate ant and a low-level guard was insignificant on the deity burial barren island, which was full of emperor lords. A life for a name. Today's matter will be considered settled. Otherwise, Qin Hao paused as the 9 layers of emperor's rings revolved beneath his feet. His Tao intent condensed into a sea of flames in the void that enveloped the entire Sky Shaker race's territory. What if you don't? Song Yao took a step forward and stared at Qin Hao. As a low-level guard, would you dare violate the rules set by the War Sacred Hall and the 5 Realm Emperors before the Relic Divine City opens? Anyone who broke the rules and caused an Emperor War between the Overlords would be killed by the War Sacred Hall and the 5 Realm Emperors. Would Li Chuji dare break the rules? Rules? Qin Hao smiled and said, Did you get my permission for the rules of the 5 Realm Monarchs? I'm asking you who did it. Qin Hao roared. The sea of fire in the void churned, and the terrifying devil flame magma came crashing down. The killing intent that enveloped the entire space caused the hearts of all the monarch lords under the sea of fire to tremble. Li Chuji of the Tao sect wasn't pretending. He wasn't joking. Thud! Thud! Emperor Yuan of the Sky Shaker clan, who was originally stepping on Qi Ziqing, had a look of extreme horror on his face. His body trembled violently. Qin Hao's question frightened him so much that his bones were about to fall apart. Obviously, the imperial light that killed Qin Guozhu came from him. As an imperial servant of the Sky Shaker clan, he couldn't tolerate an ant charging towards Emperor Song Yao. Whoosh! Immediately, Qin Hao's cold gaze fell on this person. Under the shroud of Tao will, no change in the emotions of anyone present could escape Qin Hao's discerning eyes. What do you want? Song Yao shifted his steps and stood in the middle. Did he want Emperor Yuan of the Sky Shaker clan to pay with his life for the death of a low-level Yuan venerate? Do you want to do it, or should I? Qin Hao asked. Li Chuji, don't be too arrogant. Bang! Qin Hao's 5 fingers struck across the air, and the sound of flesh exploding was heard. Immediately, blood splattered everywhere, and someone fell heavily behind Song Yao. Li, first, third. Song Yao's facial features were distorted, and his silver hair fluttered wildly. The emperor intent in his body completely erupted. Following a rumbling sound, the sky turned dark. Giant sky-burying tablets engraved with ghostly runes fell frequently, densely covering the entire sky. When one looked up, the sky was full of flickering curse lights. Many of the monarch lords present were stunned. Li Chuji of the Tao sect and Song Yao of the Sky Shaker clan were about to erupt into an emperor battle. They were astonished and terrified. No one had expected that Qin Hao would openly ignore the rules set by the War God Hall and the 5 Realms Sovereign Lord for the sake of a low-level Yuan venerate Imperial Guard. He had directly crushed the head of Sky Shaker clan's Imperial Guard in front of Song Yao. Although the one who had died was an Imperial Guard, it wasn't just Song Yao's face that had been slapped, but the entire East Seas Sky Shaker clan. A life for a life. Although it seemed reasonable, the life of a low-level Yuan venerate was incomparable to that of an emperor powerhouse. Song Yao had suffered a great loss in this transaction. However, this had nothing to do with the other Overlord forces. Even if the situation got out of hand, the War God Guards would step in to suppress it. Qin Hao and Song Yao stood face to face, exuding extreme, killing intent as they looked at each other. However, neither of them moved, as if waiting for the other to make the first move. After all, The War God Hall wasn't just for show. Even if Qin Hao wasn't afraid, he had to consider the people of the Sacred Palace and Xiaogua. Conversely, Song Yao was also reading leisurely. He was afraid of this. Rumor has it that the Dao sect's Calamity Sword Emperor is incomparably domineering. Now that I've seen him in person, he really lives up to his reputation. At that moment, a mocking laughter was heard. Feng Gaishi, a group of sword cultivators with outstanding temperaments, stepped forward and mocked Qin Hao. Whether the rumors are true or not, I don't know. Do you want to give it a try? Qin Hao glanced over coldly. He remembered that when he had first arrived at the Burial God Island, this genius, who was known as the best sword cultivator in the East Continent in 1,000 years, had tried to provoke him. The first time, Qin Hao had ignored him. Feng Gaishi didn't have the right to do so. However, he had jumped out a second time and tried to provoke Qin Hao again. Feng Gaishi seemed to have the intention of worsening the situation. Dong! Shou Wu's body technique flickered. In the next second, he appeared in front of Feng Gaishi. 8 sword rings flickered beneath his feet, and extremely sharp sword lights shone. Since Feng Gaishi was a sword cultivator, he was naturally his opponent. 8th stage Dao validation realm. Your sword intent is very pure, but I wonder how powerful you are. Feng Gaishi smiled. He was also a sword cultivator, so he could see Shou Wu's strength at a glance. Do you want to give it a try? Shou Wu said and directly used Qin Hao's words to reply. Feng Gaishi was stunned. Give it a try? A sword cultivator asked the top sword cultivator of the East Continent to give it a try? If this was said by the Dao sect's Tribulation Sword Arch, Feng Gaishi might be a bit scared. However, if it was said by other sword cultivators, even though Shou Wu was at the same level as Feng Gaishi, it was an insult to him. Because his talent and sword skills were recognized by the 5 overlords of the East Continent, Shou Wu was a nobody. How could he be qualified to challenge him? Swoosh! Swoosh! Boundless sword qi revolved around him, resembling a raging wind. Feng Wushi stared at Flawless as he spoke in an arrogant voice. Testing the sword with me. You will never forget it for the rest of your life. Then, he was about to attack. You could try to hurt him. An emperor slowly landed in front of Shou Wu. At the same time, countless sword auras fell from the sky, and each sword aura turned into a sword cultivator, standing side by side behind Shou Wu. Zhuing's Sword Palace. Feng Gaishi frowned. I'm just a junior. Hyuning, you don't have to be so serious. Seeing this, the Wind Emperor stepped forward. At the same time, the sword cultivators of the Wind People also stood side by side behind Feng Gaishi. Wind People and Zhuing's Sword Palace definitely ranked first and second in terms of sword art in the East Continent, but no one knew which one was stronger. My junior is very precious. Of course I have to be serious. If he hurts you, Ancestral Patriarch Feng will blame me, and my senior brother will not forgive me. Hyuning said with a smile. It seemed like a joke, but it was the truth. Now, Shou Wu was more important than Feng Qianli in Zhuing's heart. So he's a disciple of Sword Palace. A new disciple of Zhuing's Sword Palace? Wind Emperor asked. He deliberately glanced at Feng Qianli, who was behind Shou Wu. The two dominating forces of sword art naturally knew each other well. The most outstanding person in the current generation of Sword Palace should be Feng Qianli. But now, why was he standing behind someone else? Wind Emperor naturally did not know that Shou Wu had been hidden in Sword Pool by Zhuing's sword for 10 years, because he had never shown his face to the outside world. My junior brother's sword is a bit more ruthless than mine. Plus, he has a bad temper. It's inevitable that he will hurt Feng Gaishi. Feng Qianli seemed to feel embarrassed, so he deliberately said, in the past 10 years, he was indeed convinced, especially by Zhuing's sword's 3 sword calamities. Since he could not win in terms of strength, he could at least take advantage of his identity. Hurt me? Him? Feng Gaishi pointed at Shou Wu with disdain. I'm sorry, maybe I didn't mean it. Maybe it won't just hurt you, Feng Qianli said with a smile. He really wanted to see the fierce collision between the best sword in the East Continent and the best sword in the Divine Palace. Well, today I will challenge the disciple of Zhuing Emperor in the name of Wind People. Let all the seniors here see whether the sword of the Wind People or the sword of Sword Palace is stronger. Let's end the dispute of the best sword art in the East Continent for thousands of years. Phone Gaishi cut a piece of cloth from the corner of his clothes and threw it at Showuk's feet. He challenged in the name of his family. Winning or losing would determine the level of the two dominators in the future. As long as Showuk also cut a piece of cloth from his clothes, it would mean that the sword battle between the two sides had officially begun. As you wish. Showuk was not afraid. On his sword fingers, the platinum sword chi was sharp and was about to cut the cloth. Screech! All of a sudden, in the air, 9 blazing golden crows flew over from afar, hovering above the heads of the various transcendent powers. The 9 golden crows exuded a powerful beast chi, and each of them wasn't any weaker than Phone Gaishi and Showuk. Their bodies were tied with reins, and they were pulling a majestic war chariot. On the chariot, a figure enveloped in golden armor stood there, like a war god descending from the heavenly world, exuding an indescribable majesty. War god guards. The expressions of all the imperial lords changed drastically. As expected, Li Chuji and Emperor Song Yao had disturbed the war god temple. Chapter 1730. Just like the scene at the Mountain of Tao, when Qin Hao raised his head, the dazzling war god chariot appeared in his eyes. The 9 golden crows were like 9 suns that appeared at the same time. The terrifying Tao flames burned the ground as if they could evaporate and destroy everything. However, Zhang Lu descended again today, and the pressure was even more terrifying than at the Mountain of Tao. Moreover, he wasn't the only one in the void. Behind the war god chariot was a team of golden divine guards. There weren't many of them, only about 20. However, their combined aura was even more terrifying than a million-strong army. They were like an invincible army. Greetings, Commander Liu. All the overlord-level imperial lords in the field bowed to the void. War God Guards was the collective name of the guards of the War God Temple. Everyone had a high status. Zhang Lu was one of the 3 commanders in the War God Temple and was highly regarded by the Twilight War God. It was said that Commander Liu was adopted by the Twilight War God when he was young and was taught by the 2 peerless powerhouses, Dindi and Zhan Wu. He was like a father and son to the Twilight War God. Therefore, he could be called the young master of the War God Temple. Of course, this wasn't the only reason why the Imperial Lords were so respectful to him. Another reason was that Zhan Lu's strength had surpassed the 9th stage of the Tao Validation realm and stepped into the realm of true self. He was comparable to the patriarchs of the various clans and was a supreme powerhouse. Regardless of background, cultivation, or even seniority, he was higher than all the Imperial Lords present. Everyone should be respectful to him. The more important reason was that the War Tower was the highest guardian of the God City in the ruins. They represented the War God Temple and another true self-emperor from the Great Qin Empire. They were in charge of the entire God Burial Valley. Without their permission, no one could enter. At this moment, a terrifying pressure filled the world. The Emperor of True Self, released by Zhang Lu, was suffocating. He didn't say anything. He stood on a chariot with a war god sword in his hand. His cold gaze fell on Qin Hao and Song Yao, who were confronting each other, as if he was waiting for an explanation. Commander Liu, Li Chuji of the Tao sect, ordered people to carry the Emperor's flag and barge into my palace. They were arrogant and ran amok, disrupting the martial arts discussion in my dojo. I tolerated them in every way possible, but not only did they not restrain themselves, they even went from bad to worse. They personally killed my clan's Emperor Yuan and ignored the agreement between the War God Temple and the supreme ancestor of the 5 realms. Junior Song Yao begged Commander Liu to give justice to the East Seas Heaven Shaker clan. Song Yao shouted loudly, his voice shaking the heavens and earth. He directly dispersed the Emperor light around him and knelt on one knee. Even Shi Ziqing, the emperor of the northern borderline, was so infuriated by Song Yao's absurd words that he almost vomited blood. Song Yao was the first to accuse Song Yao, distorting right and wrong. He was simply shameless to the extreme. And then, a hoarse mechanical voice came from under the cold helmet that covered the face of the battle tower. The will of the true self-emperor fell on Qin Hao, as if waiting for him to speak. Qin Hao's expression was calm. He raised his head and glanced at the void, then turned around. He did not give any response to the battle tower and directly returned to the group of sacred palace emperors, intending to lead them away. Look, he doesn't even put you in his eyes. He is simply too arrogant. Song Yao pointed at Qin Hao's back and shouted loudly. Li Chuji, battle tower spoke. Commander Lu, what can I do for you? Qin Hao raised his head and looked up at the young master of the War God Hall, standing in the void. Once upon a time, the other party was still a mischievous child, jumping in front of him all day long with snot running down his nose and clamoring for candy. Since you are the descendant of Senior Dendi, and since this is your first offense, I will not punish you. But if there's a next time, the cold voice in the void paused. Get out of the East Continent. Commander Lu, he killed my clan's Emperor Yuan and broke the rules of the supreme ancestral masters of the Five Realms and the Sunset Battle God. You can't just... Shut up. The divine sword under battle tower's palm pressed down, and the sky seemed to sink. The suffocating emperors will blast it into Song Yao's divine soul. Song Yao's eyes were filled with horror, and the words in his mouth came to an abrupt end. He obediently shut his mouth. You could go now. 5 days later, the burial god ruins will open. Everyone in the sacred palace, remember every word I said. Battle Tower said coldly. Immediately, a ray of Emperor's light flashed out and whipped the 9 golden crows. The flames of the way dissipated, and their skin and flesh split open. The 9 golden crows let out shrill cries as they pulled the dazzling war god chariot and disappeared into the void. At this time, Qin had already led everyone out of the Sky Shaker clan's territory and returned to the southern land. He knew that Battle Tower was whipping the golden crows because they were angry with him. It was just that they couldn't vent their anger on Dendi. Damn it, Commander Lu didn't punish Li Chuji at all. Is he going to let it go just like that? Did our clansmen die in vain? A Sky Shaker clan's Emperor Yuan gritted his teeth and roared. Pa! Song Yao slapped the person who spoke to him to the ground. He slowly stood up on one leg and stared viciously at the backs of Qin Hao and the Sacred Palace's emperors. He let out a cold laugh. Of course not. 5 days later, the burial god ruins will open. At that time, I will have a lot of time to play with Tribulation Sword Emperor. Outside the ruins, the Overlord forces couldn't act wantonly. But inside the ruins, life and death were up to the heavens. Whether it was Li Chuji or the Water Jade Sacred Palace, they would all have to pay a heavy price for today. This Li Chuji is just relying on his good background and the blessing of Dendi and Daqin. Otherwise, how could Commander Lu let him off so easily? Feng Gaishi knew that Battle Tower was Dendi's. Junior let Li Chuji go probably because of the old friendship from 600 years ago. If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't have such treatment. While talking, Feng Gaishi slowly walked at Song Yao's side and said, Emperor Song Yao, you also saw the situation just now. The Juying Sword Palace and the Water Jade Sacred Palace are in cahoots, helping the evildoers. That's why Li Chuji is so fearless. After entering the ruins, it'll be a bit troublesome for the Sky Shaker clan to fight against him alone. But the Juying Sword Palace isn't the only sword cultivator in the East Continent. Song Yao smiled and waved his hand at the Wind People's emperors. If you have time, why don't you enter the palace to talk? Emperor Song Yao, how can I not accept your kind invitation? The Wind Emperor and Feng Gaishi looked at each other. The father and son walked towards the Sky Shaker clan's palace at the same time. Chapter 1731. Juying Sword Palace vaguely had the intention of drawing closer to Li Chuji. The Wind people who competed with Juying Sword Palace, as well as Song Yao, who had a grudge against Qin Hao, naturally felt the pressure rise. Joining forces was just a matter of convenience. In the Middle and North realms, many great forces watched coldly from the sidelines. The ruins of God City was about to open, so it was normal for some overlord forces to join forces. However, this kind of relationship could not withstand the test. In the face of the supreme treasure of God City, the alliance would shatter at the slightest touch. Perhaps the final fatal blow would be their beloved allies. Mo Xian, Zhou Wudao, Lei Jiao, Shuo Xiu, and many others were also present. Just now, they did not interfere. Song Yao and the Wind People wanted to join forces to deal with Qin Hao. In the eyes of others, it was just a joke. In the end, it would only lead to their own destruction. Qin Hao returned to the southern border and had a simple chat with Hyuning. After settling Qi Ziqing and the others, he immediately helped Yi Shuihan suppress his injuries. In the sky above Heaven's shaking palace, Battle Tower appeared again, causing a lot of trouble for Qin Hao. Before leaving, his whip seemed to have lashed at Golden Crow, but it was actually a serious warning to Dendi. He was angry not because Qin Hao ignored the rules set by War God Temple and the Supreme Imperial Lord of the Five Realms. Killing a Gue race emperor's servant was not important at all. The reason was the purpose of this trip. Dinda came for Mu Yue. There was no need to think too much. Battle Tower's heart was clear. Mu Yue survived John Wu's arrow and returned to the East Sea 600 years later. If Han Lingxian had not discovered her whereabouts, she would not have come to the ancient god city of God Burial Valley. Now, Mu Yue had escaped into the ancient god city with injuries. Qin Hao must have come to save her. However, this had crossed the bottom line that War God Temple could give Qin Hao. If Dinda's identity was exposed, how would Battle Tower deal with it? Even if they wanted to let Qin Hao go, would Han Lingxuan's subordinates let him go? Since he had survived, why did he come back? This was what Zhanlo had once told Qin Hao. If Dinda didn't return to the East Continent, everything would be under the control of the Sunset War Immortal. Once Qin Hao returned, the situation would be out of his control. Even if Zhan Wu wanted to hold back because of their old friendship, he couldn't. Perhaps at that moment, the history of Dinda's death in God Burial Valley would repeat itself. If War Tower could think of this, so could Qin Hao. However, he wouldn't shrink back. Not to mention that this place had once taken his life. Even if there were real gods living here, he would still protect Vivian. He had spent 600 years with her in his previous life, yet he had missed her. He wouldn't make any more mistakes in his life. Around 2 days later, Yi Shuihan had removed all the laws in his body. His injuries had recovered by 80 to 90%, and he was basically fine. Coincidentally, the southern region's overlords had arrived. Qin Hao brought people to visit Makamanji, Yi Ninghong, and the other sovereign lords. He also met with the old demon alone. No one knew what they talked about. However, on that day, Yi Shuihan and Caiogwa felt that Blood Emperor Su Yongfu had suddenly become a soulless person. The ancient god city had appeared in the world, and God Burial Valley had expanded. The ruins covered 3/4 of the desolate island. There were many treasures, and the dangers were even more terrifying. Qin Hao only wanted to find Vivian as soon as possible. For the sake of convenience and for everyone's safety, he asked Qi Ziqing, Qi Yuan, and the others to stay under Palatial Lord Yi. Because Fa Zhao was a monk, he wasn't used to being with the female disciples of Knight Azura Palace. He chose to follow Southern Region's Sword Emperor, Makamanji. The night sky was shrouded by stars. On the endless beach, huge palaces stood like giants walking under the night sky. Now, the coastal area of God Burial Desolate Island was bustling. There were all kinds of shops, and there was no lack of places for experts to entertain. For example, there were elegant buildings where beautiful women gathered, battle arenas, and auction houses. At this moment, in one of the middle domain's overlords' auction houses, many experts entered. All of them were wearing black robes, and their faces couldn't be seen clearly. This was by Yueshuan's rule. After every transaction, no one from the outside world will be able to find out the origin of the goods. Even the participants didn't know each other's background. Many black-robed figures entered the hall and passed through more than 10 layers of barriers set up by Yueshuan's experts. Finally, they arrived at an extremely secretive auction hall deep underground. Standing at the entrance of the hall, every black-robed expert had a hand over a token of Bayuxian. This was because before every auction, the people of the 5 realms would send a letter in advance. After Bayuxian received the letter, they would secretly give a unique token in return. Only those who held the token could participate in the auction that day. If anyone didn't hand over the token, they would be killed by Bayuxian's experts. Of course, everyone who came here today had a token in their hands. Bang! According to the stipulated time, when the last black-robed participant entered, the 2 extremely heavy doors of the hall closed. Immediately, a powerful array light flowed on the doors, and a turbulent array power spread throughout the entire hall. No one could see what was happening here. Sorry to trouble you, Brother Phone. Behind the door, 2 figures stood. One of them was a black-robed man who took off his robe, revealing a muscular body and a tyrannical physical body. His square and resolute face was Lei Jiao from Leichuan Judgment Hall. You pay, and I provide entertainment. We're doing things according to the rules. What trouble is there? In front of Lei Jiao, a handsome young man in white said with a smile. Bai Tianfeng, the young master of Bayuxian, was a 7th-level Emperor Realm expert. He was extremely talented and had a life-and-death relationship with Lei Jiao. At this moment, Bai Tianfeng silently glanced at the hall. In the dim light, there were about 100 experts sitting on the dense and noble chairs. Although he couldn't see the faces of these people, Bayuxian could feel that everyone here today was extremely strong. Almost every one of them made him feel a little pressured. Among them, there was no lack of existences that could threaten his life. Bai Tianfeng's eyes were filled with curiosity. Tonight, the auction house had been booked by Lei Jiao. Even Bai Tianfeng didn't know who these people were. They were all invited here by Lei Jiao. Moreover, they weren't here to auction the divine soldier and the ritual implement. Instead, they seemed to be here to gather. Every profession has its own rules. I know you're curious, but even if you're my brother, you have to follow the rules. Lei Jiao said in a low voice, indicating that Bai Tianfeng could leave. All right. Everything here belongs to you now. Have fun. Bai Tianfeng smiled, and his figure gradually blurred until his aura completely dissipated. The hall was sealed by dozens of Emperor Realm Array barriers, so Bai Tianfeng naturally couldn't stay. The one in front of Lei Jiao was just a little avatar. Boom! Bai Tianfeng disappeared. The next moment, the raging flames turned into magma and soared into the air. It was as if a layer of blood had covered the interior of the hall. Tyrannical, 9th-level Emperor Wolf flowed in the flames. Qin Hao tore off his black robe and stood on the auction stage. Whoosh! Whoosh! Below, more than 100 figures waved their hands and tore off their robes at the same time, revealing familiar faces. They were all disciples of the Divine Palace, part of the more than 300 people. Senior Brother Qin Hao. Everyone called out in unison, their expressions faintly excited. Qin Hao nodded and glanced above his head. Immediately, the Emperor will turned into an invisible force and blasted directly up. Driven by the unblemished Emperor spirit, it penetrated the sea of fire and slammed into the upper floor of the hall. Ah! Vaguely, a hazy scream sounded in everyone's ears. It was as if someone's eyes had been blinded. It was extremely mournful. If you continue to spy on me, don't blame me for being ruthless. Qin Hao transmitted his voice, and immediately, the telekinetic force that covered the hall dissipated. Bai Tianfeng, you bastard. Lei Jiao cursed angrily. He really deserved it. He hoped that Qin Hao didn't cripple him with this blow. Well, there won't be anyone spying on us from now on. Let's treat tonight's gathering as a farewell banquet. Qin Hao's gaze landed on the faces below, sweeping over them one by one. Chapter 1732. The space quieted down, and the smiles froze on everyone's faces. No one could react. Farewell banquet? What did that mean? Brother Qin Hao, what are you talking about? A disciple of the Divine Palace asked weakly. The appearance of the relic city in the Valley of the Buried Gods had alarmed the 4 regions and 8 barren lands. Many forces had come for it. At present, Many forces were still on their way, including other disciples. During the 3 years of cultivation, when the divine palace was destroyed, everyone had gone through thick and thin together. Their relationship was far from what other forces could compare to. The disciples of the divine palace trusted each other greatly. Moreover, they all had a wisp of their spiritual souls in Qin Hao's hands. With the deterrence of Muri, no one dared to be disloyal. On this trip, everyone wanted to explore the relic together. If the disciples of the divine palace worked together, who could shake them in the 4 regions and 5 realms? They would have an absolute advantage in the relic. But now, Qin Hao said that today's gathering was a farewell banquet. Ha! Without further explanation, Qin Hao's palm flashed with a halo, and he took out the life slip given by Muri. In his palm, Dilly directly shattered it into pieces. In an instant, in the hall, beams of spiritual souls raged, like broken souls constantly entering between the eyebrows of the disciples of the divine palace. At this moment, everyone's aura became more abundant. Although their realms did not increase, their spiritual souls were much stronger. There are rumors that I am a descendant of Dendi. I believe everyone has heard it. I don't want to hide it. Indeed, Din and I have a very deep relationship. In order not to affect everyone, after today's farewell, we will sever all ties. No matter what happens in the relic, remember, we will be strangers. Qin Hao said. His calm voice hit everyone's hearts. He personally crushed the life slip and returned the complete spiritual power to everyone. This was Dinda's sincerity. The quiet hall became even quieter. There was no danger, but everyone felt oppressed and depressed. It was a very simple sentence, a descendant of Dendi. However, they all knew the weight of Qin Hao's words. Even if the rumors are true, there's no need for you to. The Thunder Flood Dragon wanted to say something, but then stopped. The Emperor's will had become even more powerful after the soul had returned to its body. It should have been happy, but why was there a faint sadness in its heart? Senior brother Qin Hao, just tell us directly. What should we do? How can we help you? That's right. Even if it's the War God Temple, what is there to fear? I believe that even the setting sun war god would tremble slightly in the face of our patriarchs. Since the Daqin Empire belongs to our ancestors, it should return to senior brother Qin Hao. Just say the word, and we'll do it. Let's kill Empress Ling Xian. Voices sounded one after another. Everyone's emotions changed from calm to impassioned, and all of them revealed their sincerity. 600 years ago, Dinda died in the Valley of the Gods, and Daqin's imperial power was overturned. Although the people of the Upper Realm didn't know the truth, now this group of descendants could understand Qin Hao's position. Once they stepped into the ruins, there would be great danger, and they would face Empress Ling Xian's punishment. Qin Hao crushed the life slip and returned the complete spiritual power to everyone. Obviously, he was thinking for them and didn't want them to be involved. However, even if they were involved, what was there to be afraid of? Just the 100 or so descendants of the top forces, if they joined forces, would not be inferior to the overlords of the 5 realms in the East Continent. Under the pressure of the supreme ancestors of the 5 realms, the War God Temple had to give in the ruins. What was there to be afraid of? Didn't you understand what I said? Qin Hao stared at the disciples of the divine palace below and said, After tonight, we will have nothing to do with each other, and there will be no more descendants of the 7 peaks in this world. If anyone does not understand, I can send him down to the 7 peaks to listen to their teachings. 9 dazzling platinum emperor's rings flowed under his feet. The terrifying aura of the Emperor Lord filled the hall. The sole aura that surpassed the Tao affirmation made everyone unable to breathe. They didn't dare to say another word. Lei Jiao, Emo Xian, Zhou Wu Dao, Feng Qianli, Shua Xiao. Qin Hao looked at them. Lei Jiao waved his broad palm, and a wine table appeared out of thin air. It was densely packed with wine cups. He stepped forward, solemnly took a cup, and raised it above his head. God Worship Palace, after today, we will be strangers. After today, we will be strangers. We will not be merciful to each other in the ruins. Emo Xian's hand, which was holding the wine cup, was trembling. He almost shouted these words hoarsely. Among the people present, the one who found it hardest to make a decision was definitely Dinda's loyal servant of the Luo Moro clan. After today, there will be no more God's Palace, no more Seven Peaks. Wine cups were raised one after another. The general trend had been set. Qin Hao's position was firm and irreversible. Immediately, more than 100 people stood proudly and drank the wine in their palms. In the hall, there was a sad laughter of farewell. Even though they all left silently, the laughter didn't stop for a long time. I have killed all my life and never implicated others. You are the same. We will meet in the ruins, but we will be strangers. At this moment, Qin Hao looked at Lei Jiao and the others. Take care. Lei Jiao, Feng Qianli, Mo Xian, and the others cupped their hands. Their black robes were draped over them, and their figures gradually disappeared. Before stepping out of the hall, Zhou Wudao looked back at Qin Hao and sighed deeply. There were many things in the past that he didn't understand. Just like in Yingguei City in the northern border, he didn't understand why Zhou Wendy panicked when he saw Qin Hao. Now he understood everything. Unfortunately, after today, he could no longer stand side by side with him. Even so, this life was enough to reminisce about. Chapter 1733. This trip to the relic was to sever all ties with the Divine Palace. Qin Hao and the Divine Palace only had a mutually beneficial relationship. They could abandon each other at any time. Once they entered the Valley of the Gods, they would truly be alone. On this day, the relic finally opened. As far as the eye could see, there was a sea of people along the deserted island. All the forces were ready to go. In the endless crowd, there were hundreds of Emperor Qi and countless Renwangs. In the front of the 6 regions, the forces of the overlords were the most eye-catching. They were extremely terrifying. In the East region, there were the sky-shaking Ho clan, the sea-stepping Shuo clan, the Azura clan, the Great Zhou clan, the War God Temple, the Daqin clan, and the Eastern barbarians. In the middle region, there were the Leichuan Judgment Hall, the Zhuiying Sword Palace, the Ghost Baron Country, the White Moon Pavilion, and many other forces. In the West region, there were the Jin Tao Sengoku in full armor, the heaven-trampling sect in robes, and the Yuntian Palace cultivators who were as elegant as fairies. They all had outstanding temperaments. In the South region, the monks of the Vajra court in cassocks were extremely solemn. In the Sacred Sword Wind People's team, Feng Gaishi's gaze fell on the Shueiyao Sacred Palace and the silver-haired young man in front of the team. At this moment, Feng Gaishi sneered. The Celestial Cliffs, the ancient Ape Island, many North region cultivators, and the 7 heroes of the South region were all waiting here. In front of all the forces was an Emperor Light boundary that connected to the sky. The cultivators of all the forces looked at the boundary with excitement. Next, they were about to step into the most dangerous place on the continent, the legendary place where the gods of the 4 regions had fallen. 600 years ago, Dinda of the East region was also buried here. Today, 600 years later, many Emperor Realm cultivators among the overlords of the 4 regions would be devoured. Dazzling divine light sprinkled down from the sky, and the golden crow cried in the distance. An extremely mighty war chariot rumbled from the void and landed in the sky. Behind the chariot stood a large number of golden-armored divine guards. Although they had seen this more than once, every time they saw the figure on the chariot, the overlords of the 5 realms could not help but tremble in their hearts. War Tower, one of the 3 commanders of the War God Guards, the young master of the War God Temple. He represented the Sunset Battle God. After Zhang Lu appeared, another group of troops also appeared in the sky. Their numbers were much larger than those of the War God Temple. They were all powerful figures, all wearing pitch-black armor. A person stood on a chariot pulled by a war beast. His chi was as strong as Zhang Lu's. This army was Great Empress Ling Xian's personal guards. Their commander, Tsingang, was a great emperor of true self. Tsingang's talent was extraordinary. He was originally a small guard under Dinda's personal guard camp 600 years ago. Following the fall of Dindi, the 4 divine generals were banished by the Sunset Battle God. Singang seized the opportunity in his life and climbed up the rank step by step until he became Empress Ling Xian's trusted aide and took over the entire defense force of the imperial palace. At this moment on the war chariot Singang was in, there were two silhouettes standing there. The various transcendent powers weren't unfamiliar with these two people. One of them was the adopted daughter of the spirit empress, Han Qingji. The other was Zhang Yan, a member of the War God Hall. To be able to stand side by side with the first princess of the East Continent, Qingji Han, Zhang Yan's identity was naturally extraordinary. Speaking of which, he was quite similar to War Tower when he was young. He was also adopted and cultivated by the War God Temple. Moreover, the relationship between War Tower was very close, just like the latter and the Sunset Battle God. In the eyes of War Tower, Zhang Yan was a talented junior who had a rough fate. Perhaps they had similar experiences. One day, War Tower met Zhang Yan, who was on the verge of death, and brought him back to the War God Temple. They regarded him as their own son and focused on cultivating him. They even gave him the surname Zhang. As for Zhang Yan's original name, even War Tower had forgotten it. Godfather. Zhang Yan was wearing a tight black robe. His valiant temperament outlined his well-built body. His handsome face revealed a mischievous smile. Facing War Tower on War God's chariot, he raised his hand and waved. 9 golden crow beast emperors surrounded the chariot. War Tower was like a cold statue. His hands were on his sword, and he ignored Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan smiled. In the presence of others, his godfather always pretended to be emotionless, just like the sunset battle god on the sunset peak. Greetings to Commander Liu and Commander Sin, the Overlord forces said in unison. When the burial god relic opens, the 4 regions will treat everyone equally and compete fairly. Once you enter, your life and death will be up to fate. Even if someone dies here, when you come out, you're not to seek revenge. Otherwise, you'll be killed. A terrifying divine sense shrouded the boundless sea of people below. Under the battle helmet of the War Tower, a hoarse voice like that of metal came out. None of the overlords could deceive him. We will abide by the rules of the Supreme Imperial Lord of the 5 Realms and War God. The various forces said in unison. In this trip to the relic, the strongest person in the group was limited to the Sovereign Emperor realm. The various old ancestors would not hide in the relic. Remember, once you enter the relic, you will be responsible for the consequences. However, I hope that you will prioritize the treasures. Wantonly fighting in the God Burial Valley is not beneficial to you. There are many dangers inside, and there are God Realm experts' remnant souls. Once they are awakened, it will be your doomsday. Even if Commander Tsin and I take action, we will not be able to save you. War Tower said. Remember every word of Commander Liu. It is not a game. Singang looked below. In order to chase after Mu Yue, he had also entered the relic. Naturally, he had some understanding of the situation inside. He did not know how dangerous the God Burial Valley was when Dindi entered 600 years ago. If Singang entered now, he would definitely die. If he accidentally stepped into a dangerous place, there was no chance of survival. This was also one of the reasons why the 5 old ancestors were not willing to enter. It was too dangerous. Who did not want to live for a few more years? Once an old ancestor of an overlord force died, the family's foundation of thousands of years would be destroyed overnight. The Mu clan of the Penglai 3 Immortals was the best example. Back then, Mu Xinjiao was defeated and his entire family collapsed. This was a warning to the world. In order to prevent any conflicts, I have set up a teleportation barrier. After entering the World Gate, you will appear in different locations in the relic. As for whether there are treasures near your destination, or if you will be teleported to a dangerous place, it will depend on your luck. Singang glanced at War Tower. Open the World Gate. War Tower said solemnly. Rumble. Above the void, the War God Guards pressed down with their palms. More than 20 rays of Emperor light fused into the barrier that sealed the relic. On the barrier that seemed to be blocking another world, dozens of door-shaped holes gradually appeared. Each of the world gates was incomparably tall. Each of the world gates was like a teleportation channel that led to the ancient era. At this moment, a desolate and majestic ancient aura seeped through the world gates. It overflowed from the god burial valley and spread towards the outside world. Even Singang, who was leading the Daqin army, and War Tower, who was on the war god chariot, could not help but shiver when they felt the desolate aura coming from the world gates. The various sovereign lords looked at the world gates. Through their blurry vision, they seemed to see a vast and endless ancient battlefield. In that battlefield, there were many destroyed giant cities, severed mountains, and majestic beast bones that were weathered into stone. Everywhere was broken and revealed a terrifying aura. The hearts of many sovereign lords trembled slightly. Just those blurry cities and beast bones gave them a sense of fear. It was hard to imagine how terrifying those creatures were when they were alive. Qin Hao's red lotus fire eyes flickered. Through the world gates, he also saw part of the scene. Furthermore, he saw it more carefully than anyone else. Although the situation had changed greatly, the terrain of the God Burial Valley was still familiar to him. He could not help but recall the scene of his death. His hands trembled slightly. "Senior Li, are you all right?" A gentle voice sounded behind him. It was the little fairy of the sacred palace, Wu Yu. Her voice seemed to contain some kind of magical power that could instantly clear one's mind. After entering, no one is allowed to leave within 10 zhang of me. Qin Hao took a deep breath and said, he had come to the God Burial Valley again. Yes. The sovereign lords of the sacred palace nodded solemnly. Through the world gates, if you want to come out alive, it will depend on your own abilities. I wish you all the best. After War Tower finished speaking, the world gates released surging rays of light. The power of the array was activated. All the forces on the desolate island could enter. Instantly, there were Emperor Realm experts who directly stepped forward and led their groups into the world gates. Immediately, many of the transcendent powers started to move. They scrambled to be the first to enter the world gates. Large batches of people disappeared one after another. Gradually, the crowd on the beach became more and more sparse. It was as though they were being devoured by the world behind the world gates. It's still too early to leave now. The groups flew through the air and disappeared into the world gates. At this moment, War Tower's voice rang in Qin Hao's ears from the Void War God's war chariot. If he left now, there wouldn't be any risk of him being exposed. Singang wasn't as soft-hearted as him. Naturally, if Qin Hao left now, he would never be able to see Mu Yue again. This was his only chance. Qin Hao acted as though he didn't hear anything. He continued walking towards the southern region's forces. War Tower stood in the air and stared at him. Under his helmet, 2 rays of Emperor Light suddenly flashed. After that, the Emperor Light slowly dissipated. He had already said what he needed to say. If Dendi insisted on being stubborn, then he would dig his own path. Everyone, after entering the relic, please be careful and serious. Qin Hao said to Makamanji and the others. There's no need to be so dramatic. I've decided to join forces with Old Mu and Palace Lord Yi. With the 3 sects working together, how can that damn place trap us? Arhut Temple's Luo Di said. You'd better listen to his advice. Next to him, the sun god of the sacred temple's voice came from a ball of flames. Immediately after, the flames rushed towards one of the world gates. Blazing Sun Temple was alone and didn't join forces with any of the southern region's forces. Arrogant, Luo Di curled his lips. In the southern region, the current lord of the sacred temple was worshipped as the sun god. However, the place they were going to today was a place where a real god had died. Let him be. With his cultivation, it won't be easy for the emperors of the 5 realms of the East Continent to defeat him. Makamanji was still very confident in the strength of the sun god. He looked at Shou Wuk and said, Wuk, are you really not going with the sword sect? Normally, Makamanji wouldn't stop Shou Wuk from following Qin Hao. However, today was different from the past. During this period, he had heard many rumors about the Dao sect Tribulation Sword Emperor, who had a relationship with Dendi 600 years ago. This trip to the relic, there would be many forces of the East Continent targeting Qin Hao. Uncle, do you remember what you said? A true sword cultivator should stand side by side with the strongest. Every time you use your sword, you shouldn't have any regrets. Shoak said. You child, Makamanji said helplessly. Don't worry, Wuk will be fine. Chinhao chuckled. Master, you must be careful. The old demon's face was very pale. He seemed to have a lot to say, but didn't dare to. All right, let's go. Yininghong was afraid that Su Yongfu would ruin Chinhao's matter, so she dragged him directly towards the world gate. Makamanji, Luo Di, and their disciples followed closely behind. Chapter 1734. Together? If you and I work together, we can roam freely in the ruins, including the future world. Before leaving, Ning Tianqing sent an invitation to Chinhao. Our paths are different, Chinhao replied calmly. Huh. Ning Tianqing nodded and said no more. This was the last chance he gave Chinhao to show off. Unfortunately, the other party did not know how precious it was. Looking up at Qing Jihan and coldly staring at Zhang Yan beside her, Ning Tianqing followed Emperor Ning Wuming into a realm gate. Behind them, the strongest lineup of the Ning Wuming Empire followed closely. Although the burial god ruins were dangerous and unpredictable, there were also countless opportunities. After entering, the fate of many people and forces would be reversed, reaching an unimaginable level. Prince Ning Wuming believed that he would be the one with the strongest creation realm among all of them. The proud Emperor Li Yuan looked at Chinhao, wanted to say something, but hesitated. Seniorly, do you have something to tell me? Chinhao asked. Forget it. It's not good for me to talk too much. You will understand when the time comes. Take care. Li Yuan finally restrained himself. Emperor lights surged, and he disappeared into the realm gate with the princes and the experts of the Li clan. So mysterious. Chinhao did not understand what Li Yuan was trying to say, but he was not in the mood to think about it. Now that the 7 heroes of the southern region had all entered the realm gate, it was time for the sacred palace to move. Everyone's eyes met, and rays of emperor light bloomed as they flew into a huge realm gate at the same time. Almost a second after Chinhao moved, the East Sea Heaven Shaker race and the southern region's Sacred Sword Wind people tacitly gathered together and followed into the same realm gate, as if they did not want to be left behind by the sacred palace. Song Yao and the Wind people have joined forces, 3 Emperor Lords and 1 Quasi-Emperor Lord. You look very calm. Aren't you worried at all? In the void, Sun Gang's voice quietly sounded in Zhang Lu's mind. What does it have to do with me? Zhang Lu responded coldly. He pressed the divine sword in his hand, and the 9 golden crows cried in unison, flapped their fiery wings, and pulled the chariot away. He, descendant of Dendi? Li Chuji's face appeared in Sun Gang's mind. He wanted to see how long the war god temple and the descendant of Dendi could pretend. Save Muyue? Wishful thinking. Qingji, it's time for us to make a move. Just thinking about the place that Lord Battle God went to 600 years ago makes me excited. Zhang Yin impatiently reminded. The deepest layer of God Burial Valley? Today, 600 years later, he was still able to step foot there. Let's go. Qing Jihan jumped off the war chariot and flew into the realm gate with Zhang Yin. Protect the princess and young Master Yin. Sun Gang waved his hand. Behind him, rays of Emperor's light followed closely behind him. Among them, the auras of 3 Emperor Realm sovereigns were especially strong. The princess of the Eastern Continent, the young master of the War God Temple, and Denda's descendant had all entered the ancient God burial grounds. This scene was quite similar to back then. While the forces of the 4 regions and 5 realms were entering the ancient God burial grounds, a fierce battle was erupting in a sea region extremely far away from the ancient God burial grounds. A 1,000-foot wave surged into the sky. Violent, beastly roars shook the heavens and earth. A giant sea demon struggled for its life. On its 1,000-foot-long body, there were ghastly holes spewing out dark red blood, dyeing the sea region within a 100-mile radius red. Emperor's light flowed on its body. 8 resplendent Emperor's rings vibrated. The terrifying Beast Emperor's laws seemed to have turned the Eastern Sea upside down. All the sea demons in the area were frightened and fled for their lives. At this moment, amidst the exploding waves, more than 10 human figures surrounded the sea demon, sealing off any escape routes. Terrifying laws blasted into the sea demon's wounds, continuously weakening its strength. Even though this sea demon had the strength of an 8th-stage Dao sovereign and was about to step into the Emperor realm, its aura continued to weaken, and its strength to struggle became weaker and weaker. Still resisting? A woman's voice burst out. 9 Emperor's rings flowed under her feet. Her fair palm pressed down, and the laws turned into countless petals that fluttered and fell on the sea demon's body. Once the seemingly weak petals touched the sea demon let out a heart-wrenching scream. If the experts of the 5 realms were here to watch, they would definitely recognize that this woman was Island Lord Yunro, who was ranked in the top 3 of the Windflower Island strength. Windflower Island was as famous as Ancient Ape Island. Even though it was a force formed by women, it was extremely powerful. Yunro was also known as the most beautiful woman in the East Continent. In terms of beauty alone, Yunro's fame was above Empress Ling Xian's. Of course, in terms of strength, Yunro was far from being comparable to the Empress of Daqin. Even so, Yunro's cultivation base was at the pinnacle of the 1st stage of the Emperor realm. Below the true self Great Emperor, there were very few people in the 5 realms who could defeat her. Yunro's strength was absolutely tyrannical. But now, she was attacking a sea demon. Even though this sea demon was in the 8th stage of the Dao validation realm, it was still a little degrading to Island Lord Yunro. However, she did not care. As long as the little princess of Phoenix Flower Island was happy, she would even pluck the heart of a golden ancient ape, let alone a mere wild sea demon. It's too pitiful. It can't fight back at all. Mother Yunro, why don't you let it go? A cute voice came from the void. It was light and childish, and the coquettish tone could melt one's heart. It was completely irresistible. That's right, Sister Yunro. It's not easy to cultivate, and it's resisting so fiercely. Being Bao, Er's mount must have hurt its pride. After the little girl's voice fell, another female voice came. Her tone was gentle and full of love. This is not a dragon. It's almost extinct in the East Sea. Now that we've encountered it, it must be a special arrangement by the heavens. Moreover, in a place like the Valley of the Gods, if we fight, it might affect Bao. How can Bao be injured? With it guarding me, I can also fight freely. Ha! Contrary to her sweet appearance, Yunro was full of masculinity. She raised her head and laughed heartily. On her beautiful face, her smiling eyes turned into crescents as she looked at the mother and daughter floating in the air. Even though she was called the most elegant beauty in the East Continent, she could not help but lose some of her beauty when compared to this pair of mother and daughter. They were too beautiful. As a mother, their beauty was enough to move Yunro's heart, not to mention the little cutie beside her. She was like a little angel sent by the heavens. She bet her dignity as the most beautiful woman in the East Continent. Yunro swore that she would not allow anyone to hurt them. If the 5 realm sovereigns were present, their jaws would drop. It was hard to imagine that the island master of Phoenix Flower Island, Yunro, would have such a love-struck side. It was truly intoxicating. Xiao Han smiled and patted the head of the little girl beside her. Seeing Yunro working so hard, Xiao Han could not help but sigh. Her luck was too good. Back then, when the Void battleship was destroyed and she was heavily injured by the Tao of Lightning, she thought that she was going to die. In the end, she floated to the Phoenix Flower Island. Yunro saved her and treated her injuries. She guided her on the path of Emperor. She was both her senior and senior sister. She took good care of her, especially in the 2nd year. When Bao was born, the maternal instinct of the most beautiful woman in the East Continent was completely ignited. Yunro went from being the 3rd island master to a full-time nanny. Her entire heart revolved around Xiao Han and her child. Now 13 years had passed, and Bao was 12 years old. Xiao Han did not know what name to give to the child. Qin Hao was not around. If he did not give the child a good name, would he blame him? Hence, he decided to call the child Bao Qin Bao. You shrew. No wonder no man dares to want you at such an old age. Who can control you? An extremely coarse roar shook the heavens and the earth. It was filled with incomparable anger and humiliation. The 1,000-foot-long dragon shark thrashed wildly in the sea. It could not win or escape and could only humbly show off its courage with words. Who are you calling old? Yunro's face suddenly darkened. She gritted her teeth and said each word clearly. Her fair hand clenched into a fist and a terrifying ball of Emperor's light brood. 9 layers of Emperor's rings circled above the light of the way. The fist radiance slammed down forcefully. I accept my fate. I accept my fate. I want to be the most loyal mount in the world. The dragon shark beast looked at the terrifying fist radiance coming down from the sky. It seemed to be piercing through the heavens and the earth. It screamed crazily and gave up all struggle. Buzz! The void trembled violently. Just as the fist radiance was about to hit the dragon shark's huge head, the fist force suddenly dissipated. Yunro clapped her hands and looked up. Her expression was gentle and amiable. She said, Princess Bao, it is now your pet. Mother Yunro is so powerful. When I grow up, I want to be as powerful as you. The tiny body was jubilant. Qin Bao, who had just reached the waist of an adult, waved her small pink fist and jumped down from Xiaohan. She jumped more than 1,000 feet, scaring all the fairies of Phoenix Flower Island. However, just as she was about to leave Xiaohan's side, a ball of orange flame burst out of Qin Bao's body. Although the flame was thin, it allowed her to fly freely in the sky. Her movements were more agile than a fish in the sea. Whoosh! The fairies of Phoenix Flower Island all let out a sigh of relief and wiped away the sweat on their foreheads. They had surrounded the dragon shark for so long and did not feel tired. Instead, the little girl's jump made them feel that it was more terrifying than facing a supreme emperor. Wait, orange flames? Yuanzong. The fairies of Phoenix Flower Island were stunned. They stared at the tiny body falling from the sky. A 12-year-old saint. Oh, my little princess, don't hurt yourself. Yunro nervously opened her arms and took Qin Bao into her arms. She leaned her face against the little girl's pink cheeks and rubbed it intimately. Hurry up and recognize me as your master. If you don't, I might die from excessive blood loss. The pitiful sound of the dragon shark's tears came from below. You don't have the right to talk. What request do you have? Yunro stepped down and stood on top of the dragon shark's head. The dragon shark's eyes rolled back and his mind shook violently. He almost fainted. Let me ask you very seriously. Are you sincere in becoming my mount? She gently put down Bao, and watched her squat down and use one finger to draw circles on the dragon shark's head. Qin Bao, blinked her innocent eyes and cutely asked for the dragon shark's opinion. If I say that I was forced and that I actually want to be the companion of this vast East Sea, will you be angry? The dragon shark asked carefully. The little girl was pure and kind. If she was willing to plead, Yunro might be lenient. I'm not angry, not at all. What's there to be angry about with a dead dragon? Qin Bao smiled like the moon. She suddenly poked the finger that was circling the dragon shark's head. With a whoosh, a blood arrow flew out. Monster! The giant beast of the East Sea cried out in pain. It had the blood of ancient dragons flowing in its veins. Its dragon body, which was comparable to an emperor weapon, was so weak in the hands of a 12-year-old girl. Chapter 1735. Stepping into the realm gate, a glaring light surged in front of them. As the world spun, the surroundings began to change rapidly. When Qin Hao opened his eyes again, he found himself in an extremely vast world. This place was no longer a deserted island. After that, figures appeared one after another. Just as War Tower and Singang said, the same team stepped into the realm gate at the same time and was teleported to the same place. Around Qin Hao, there was no one from the Sacred Palace missing. Shou Wuk, Su Jin, and Yi Shuihan were also present. Everyone is here. After checking, Showuk looked at Qin Hao. Qin Hao looked around. The feeling of crossing the realm gate was very mysterious. He could reach the inside with a single thought and didn't feel uncomfortable. Now, they were somewhere in the ancient ruins. The sky was very clean without a single cloud, making it seem very vast. There were many tiny dust particles floating in the air. As if affected by a strange power, the dust particles couldn't land on the ground. Everywhere was filled with a thick ancient aura. It was dilapidated and desolate, making people feel reverence. It was very different from the Valley of the Gods in his previous life. Qin Hao also found that after he spread out his emperor's will, he couldn't extend it too far. He could only explore about 1,000 li. Any further, and his emperor's will would directly dissipate, as if it was dissolved by the ancient aura of the ruins. This ancient battlefield appeared on the basis of the Valley of the Gods. Although the changes are not small, many of the terrains haven't changed. Qin Hao could vaguely recognize that the terrains were advantageous to him. Because he had explored it in his previous life, he knew which places were filled with danger and which places were easy to pass through. Even if the area expanded, there would be some impact, but it wouldn't be too big. All of a sudden, the blood in his body surged. A very familiar feeling penetrated the boundless heavens and earth, penetrating Qin Hao's divine soul from a faraway place. His expression changed slightly, and the Emperor Qi in his body began to circulate uncontrollably. A sharp light flashed on his golden finger. In the next instant, the light faded and the feeling disappeared. What's going on? Qin Hao revealed a surprised expression. Just now, he had sensed the aura of the Crimson Arrow. Although it was weak, he couldn't be wrong. Moreover, he clearly did not use any dilly. So why did the golden finger activate? It was as if his bloodline had been disrupted by some external force. Senior Li, you've been feeling uneasy ever since you came to the deserted island. Are you really all right? The Sacred Palace's little fairy Worryless could easily sense the changes in Qin Hao. I'm fine. It's just that just now, it felt like my bloodline was tied down by something. Qin Hao felt that it was strange. It was normal for him to secretly circulate the Emperor's will. Could it be an illusion? Boss, you mustn't let anything happen to you at this critical juncture, Yi Shuihan said, while trembling with fear. He looked at the sky-reaching skeletons in the distant sky. They were incomparably huge, and it was unknown how far away they were, but they could still see them. How did these ruins come into being? Did a fierce battle between gods really erupt here a long time ago? Rumble. As soon as Yi Shuihan finished speaking, a series of earth-shattering tremors sounded. The emperor's will filled the world, and many emperors' wills fought with each other violently. Immediately after, the auras of several Emperor Realm experts disappeared. Emperor-level Dao will. Elder Tian Yun frowned. As soon as they entered, a battle broke out. Judging from the auras that disappeared, one side's experts had been directly wiped out. That was really brutal. At this moment, everyone was on high alert. Li Chuji, what should we do next? Qian Ning asked. The forces were merciless when they met, and they killed everyone as soon as they attacked. Even the geniuses of the East Continent felt the danger and pressure. Just follow me. Qin Hao walked in a direction. The goal of this trip was very clear. First, he had to find the severely injured Mu Yue. Along the way, all the opportunities would belong to the Sacred Palace and Wuk. Of course, this was on the premise that the Sacred Palace could bear it, and some of the opportunities were not something ordinary people could bear. For example, the 9 elements of desolation. Since the moment he stepped onto the Burial God Island, the Great Void Cauldron's artifact spirit had released a strong message to Qin Hao. There were remaining elements of desolation in the ruins, and with the guidance of the artifact spirit, he could identify the direction. Other than the Burial God Palace, Qin Hao did not dare to say whether there were other divine artifacts on this ancient battlefield. But one thing was certain. Under the divine Tao, the most powerful thing in the mortal world was the elements of desolation. After all, that feeling was still engraved in his heart. Now, there was elements of desolation in the direction that Qin Hao was heading. So far, He had collected the red lotus fire and the nether cleansing water, refined the divine light of judgment into Wei Wei's origin soul. The universe creation earth formed Tao bodies for Li Wanji and Lin Feng, and the wind of disaster merged into Lin Feng's soul. He had obtained 5 of the 9 elements of desolation, and there were 4 left. The 4 were all-encompassing gold, void chain, no return, and 9 heavens imperial thunder. He didn't know which of the remaining 4 was the one in front. On the battlefield of the ruins, there were many treasures. In the dilapidated cities, in the failed arrays, in the caves, and even at the bottom of the rivers, there was a large amount of dazzling treasure, light blooming. After the various forces stepped in, they immediately began to plunder. But it was not easy to occupy. Many forces were attracted by the light of the Tharch artifacts and encountered them one after another. Battles could be seen everywhere in the ruins, and the competition was extremely fierce. Of course, even if they defeated their opponents, they might not be able to subdue the ownerless Tharch artifacts. The more powerful the artifact, the stronger the artifact's spirit. Some Tharch artifacts were so powerful that they could kill Emperor Yuan. Many powerhouses unfortunately suffered from the backlash and died in the process of subduing them. At this time, on the top of a mountain with flowing immortal light, there was a 10,000-year-old Tao tree with branches and leaves. The towering tree crown was like a giant palm supporting a part of the world. On the Tao tree, there were many Tao fruits. Each Tao fruit contained an extremely shocking power of Tao validation. There were all kinds of Tao validation auras, and the rich aura of the Tao fruits attracted the forces to fight over them. Here, a fierce battle broke out. The Miao tribe of the West Border is only SOSO. In front of the 10,000-year-old Tao tree, 2 figures with surging Tharch auras stood in the air. Each of them stepped on 9 layers of the arch rings and confronted each other, not allowing the other to take half a step closer. Below them, 2 forces were fighting. Waves of terrifying rule light blasted out, and people kept falling to the ground and dying. East Border Lu Dao tribe. An old woman with a hunched figure and white hair stared at the opposite side. It was a cultivator dressed in foreign clothes. He wore a ghost mask on his face and carried 2 swords on his shoulders. The 2 swords were crossed, and the Dilly aura he exuded was very strong, giving her a lot of pressure. Not only her, but the battle below was also very unfavorable for the Miao tribe. The Lu Dao tribe of the West Border was very good at killing and poison. Although the Miao tribe's poison technique was the best in the East Continent and the West Border, it was very difficult for them to fight against the Lu Dao tribe's ghost cultivators. In another hour, nearly half of your men will die. Are you still not willing to stop and give up? The Lu Dao tribe imperial lord with the ghost mask sneered. He was in no hurry at all. I was the one who discovered the 10,000-year-old Tao tree. You are the ones who should give up. The old woman replied harshly. She was slightly agitated. The Miao tribe was in a disadvantageous position, and she could not watch as more people died. It doesn't matter who discovered it first. What matters is whether you're strong enough. Think carefully. If we fight, we will not only lose a few people, but our entire team will be destroyed. Hidden Blade's hand slowly reached to his shoulder and grasped the hilt of his sword. His master was the strongest cultivator in the East Border tribe, Emperor Yujing. Unfortunately, Yujing was killed by the Sunset Battle God. In this trip to the ruins, he had the mission of making the Lu Dao orthodoxy prosper. He wanted all the fruits of the 10,000-year-old Dao tree. Damn it! Old Lady Miao clenched her fists. Indeed, the aftermath of a battle between imperial lords was enough to kill both sides. Even if this Lu Dao tribe imperial lord did not care about the lives of his subordinates, how could she bear to implicate the descendants of the Miao tribe? But if she did not act, she would not be able to win. She was unwilling to leave just like that. Jiuing, is this all you can do with your 9 heads? Tear them apart for me, and I promise to set you free after this battle. Waves of surging blade light brushed past their bodies as they flew by, and the silhouettes of ghost martial artists constantly appeared in front of them. A Miao youth who had absorbed his soul into his body and transformed into a werewolf, his sharp wolf claws flowing with venom, rushed towards a 9-headed black dragon that was trapped in the middle of the encirclement and roared with gritted teeth. More than 10 years ago, he was ordered to go to Phoenix Flower Island to collect medicinal herbs. On his way back, he encountered a dying head in the East Sea. It was actually a snake head. Miao Lang was very surprised. He had never seen anything that still had the willpower to survive after its body was destroyed. Even though the snake head's skin and flesh were split open, and its wounds were flowing with terrifying lightning, it was able to hold on. This was enough to prove that it was extraordinary. Miao Lang brought it back to the Miao tribe. His great-grandmother spent 3 years to use poison to reverse the rules to cure it. Who knew that the snake head would regain its consciousness and its murderous nature would rise? It was incomparably ferocious and almost swallowed Miao Lang in one bite. Later, with the help of his great-grandmother's poison, she planted a goo in the snake's head. Only then was it restrained. However, as its cultivation gradually recovered, and it grew a dragon-like body and 8 other heads, this fellow began to go berserk again. Especially in the past 2 years, it was even faintly unable to suppress the goo poison. Its blood seemed to have developed an antidote to the poison. Miao Lang guessed that the big snake had a master and urgently wanted to return to its master's side. Sooner or later, such a day would come. It was just that he spent so much effort to cure it. It even developed immunity to the Miao tribe's poison and had great research potential. He was really unwilling to let it go. But now, if there was something that could reverse the situation, it had to be this big snake. Miao Lang knew that Jiao Ying's ability was not as simple as it appeared. Moreover, it was not afraid of death when it went crazy. Are you sure? In midair, the enormous malevolent body coiled into a ball. No matter how the blade intent and rules slashed, the pitch-black dragon scales splashed in all directions. It was actually unharmed. Jiao Ying, who had swallowed the blood of the real Black Dragon Emperor, had almost completely transformed into a dragon. On top of the 9 enormous dragon heads, pairs of scarlet eyes flickered with a frenzied ferocity. Help us seize the Dao tree, and I'll let my great-grandmother dissolve your goo poison and completely return your freedom. Miao Lang loudly replied. His venomous wolf claws slashed out, and a terrifying poisonous light slashed through the air. A ghost martial artist hidden in the air was sent flying with his blade broken. He spat out a mouthful of black, poisonous blood, but Miao Lang was also about to be unable to hold on. Good, watch me kill them. Jiao Ying let out a berserk dragon roar. Its tightly coiled and sturdy body suddenly unfolded. Like a huge dragon, it swooped down, and its 9 heads sprayed out a poisonous fog into the air. In an instant, the poisonous fog pervaded the entire space. The ghost martial artists hidden in the poisonous fog danced and escaped, revealing their true bodies one after another. Jiao Ying laughed nastily. Its bloody mouth opened and frantically bit towards the figures in the poisonous fog. If not for the goo poison in its master's brain and the old woman's way of poison being too fierce, it would have already refined the goo poison. These years, it had continuously fused with the dragon's blood, and its strength had increased. Only then was it able to withstand the pain of the goo poison. Since it had the opportunity to return to Qin Hao's side earlier, it must do its best. Chapter 1736. The dragon's body crushed through, causing the space to rumble and the earth to shake. In the process of the poisonous fog, the ghost martial artists appeared frequently. In fact, Jiao Ying's poison was not a threat. The ghost martial artists of Flowing Island were also proficient in poison, but the poisonous fog was mixed with his gastric juices. After being contaminated, the gastric juices broke the ghost martial artists' concealment technique. Now that they were exposed, the Miao tribe martial artists would no longer be restrained. Well done, Miao Lang shouted. His tribe had used many methods to force their opponent out, but Jiao Ying had done it. He had not misjudged him. At this time, Jiao Ying's huge dragon body rushed past. and his strong body forced many ghost martial artists to retreat. His 9 heads bit and tore at one of the ghost martial artists. One of the ghost martial artists was half a beat slower, and his body was torn apart by 2 dragon heads. The battle was immediately separated, relieving the pressure on the Miao tribe and allowing everyone to breathe. In front of the Dao tree, Hidden Blade glanced at Jiuying. He had underestimated this demon dragon. However, it was a daydream for a mere 5th-layer Emperor's way to turn the situation around. At this moment, a sorcerer wearing a sorcerer's robe walked out from the group of ghost warriors. He waved the skeletal crutch in his hand, and a series of cryptic incantations came out from his mouth. The skull on the crutch shone with a thick green light, and the space immediately pressed down on the tyrannical Emperor Qi. 7 Emperor's rings flickered under this person's feet. With a whoosh, a rotten flower broke through the ground and emerged from the ground. It was incomparably huge, and the unfolded petals were like a large, stinking mouth, revealing countless sharp saw teeth. Along with a large number of scarlet silk threads, they quickly wrapped around the Jiuying's neck. Suddenly, a terrifying light flashed wildly from the threads, and an irresistible force numbed the body, dragging Jiuying in. Then the petals closed. Jiuying, Miao Lang was extremely shocked. What was that? The Xidagarba flower, my emperor's spirit, can devour everything, including the spirit and will. A 5th-layer emperor's weight demon dragon will not be able to escape. Now that there is no one in the way, kill. The sorcerer pointed forward with his skeletal crutch. From the bottom of his feet, thorny vines extended forward. The roots of the Xidagarba flower frantically swept towards the Miao tribe, and a large number of Flowing Island ghost martial artists followed. As expected, it is still not working. Miao Lang's face was extremely ugly. Looking at the rotten flower devouring Jiuying, he was very uneasy. Looks like we have no choice but to give up. Beside Miao Lang, an old man sighed. They had fought for 2 hours, and many of their clansmen had died. Although the warriors of Flowing Island had also suffered losses, relatively speaking, the other side still had the upper hand. If they continued to fight, not only would they not be able to obtain the fruit of the way, but they would also lose their clansmen. It was not worthwhile. The Miao people of the west border were considered the overlords of a region, but there were too many strong warriors entering the ruins this time. They couldn't even deal with the Lu Dao people. If they knew this would happen, they wouldn't have come. Many eyes looked in the direction of the tree of the path. Many Miao people were waiting for their grandmother to give the order to retreat. Looking at these gazes, the group granny sighed helplessly. Forget it, I'm not as good as him, so there's no point in fighting. However, just as she was about to give the order, there was a loud rumble. The Xidagarba flower that trapped the 9-headed snakelet exploded into pieces. A huge dragon body soared into the sky and let out a crazy roar. One of its heads shot out at lightning speed and directly swallowed the body of the sorcerer who was holding the skeletal crutch. The sharp dragon teeth slashed down, and the sorcerer's protective emperor's light dimmed rapidly. His already ugly facial features were distorted in fear, making him look even uglier. How is this possible? The wizard tried his best to release Dilly. He was a 7th-tier Dao realm cultivator. How could he not suppress a 5th-tier demon emperor? You ant. Don't forget what the ancient beast's strongest weapon is. It's not the power of Dao will. It's pure power. Humans can never compare to it. The 8 dragon heads of the 9-headed snakelet roared. Its body was stained with blood. Its dragon scales were almost completely melted. Being eroded by the Xidagarba flower, it could feel its flesh and blood being sucked away. Even so, it had to open a way for the Miao tribe to return to Qin Hao's side. Emperor, save me. The wizard's emperor. Emperor. The 9-headed snakelet's sharp dragon teeth were about to pierce his flesh. Too crazy. The demon was too crazy. Seeing this, the Miao tribe who had planned to give up on the Dao fruit seemed to have been injected with hot blood. They did not need to communicate and attack the ghost warriors. In fact, it was because of the wizard that they were suppressed. Now that the wizard was bitten by the 9-headed snakelet, his life was in danger. It was the best time to fight back. After this battle, I'll set you free, Miao Lang yelled, waving his ferocious claws to kill. The claws, filled with venom, pierced through the body of a ghost martial artist. After the ghost martial artist's saber was broken, his body was cut into several pieces. Before his limbs fell to the ground, they were directly melted by the venom. The nine-headed snakelet was badly mutilated. Its flesh was constantly corroding and falling off. Even though it had killed a 7th-tier Emperor Dao realm cultivator, it would be seriously injured after this battle. Miao Lang knew that the nine-headed snakelet's belief was to leave. Although he was reluctant, he could not force it. Bastard. The Hidden Blade Emperor unleashed his aura. Seeing the wizard in danger, he naturally could not save him. The wizard's ability was outstanding. He was a rare expert in Ingzhou. It would be a pity to abandon him. It was so fast that Hidden Blade's movements could not be seen. Even though the ancestor of the Miao tribe could sense the blade while released by Hidden Blade, she could not keep up with the speed of the enemy. The blade light had already been slashed. Shameless Wei tribe. Granny Miao roared. The 9 emperor rings under her feet spun. Her body exploded with a terrifying venom. She raised her hand and attacked Hidden Blade's chest. It was too late to save the 9-headed snakelet. She might as well attack Hidden Blade and injure him. Then she would have the upper hand, and the Tree of Dao would still belong to her family. Hidden Blade laughed hoarsely under the ghost mask. He watched Granny Miao's venomous palm attack coming. He did not dodge or dodge. He only disappeared when the venomous palm penetrated his body. After image, Granny Miao was shocked. What terrifying speed. Correct. Iato slash. A strong sense of danger came from behind. As the blade slashed out, the shadows of the blade overlapped. It was as if thousands of blades had been gathered into one attack. Granny Miao turned around and attacked with her 5 fingers. The Emperor Poison in her body roared. Poison gathered in her palm. With a bang, the venomous light shattered. Granny Miao's bent body flew back dozens of feet. She felt a sharp pain in her palm. At this moment, the 9-headed snakelet was crazily devouring the wizard. He only had one thought in his mind, which was to kill the wizard and regain his freedom. He could then find Qin Hao. Suddenly, a beam of blade, Qi, came from afar. It contained the terrifying power of the 9th-tier Emperor Path. It could easily kill him. When the 9-headed snakelet noticed it, the blade light was reflected in his eyes. Ha! A palm reached out. The blade light slashed down and hit the palm. Instead of saying it hit the palm, it was more accurate to say that it was caught by the palm. What frightened the 9-headed snakelet was that the blade force that contained the power of the Emperor Path was crushed by the palm. How terrifying was the owner of this palm? Long time no see. You've transformed into a dragon. A familiar voice sounded beside his ear. It was calm and composed, and it naturally gave people the feeling of looking up to it. The 9-headed snakelet loosened its grip on the magus, and on its 9 heads, the 18 pairs of eyes began to tear up. Looking at the back of the person in front of it, it choked and said, "Master." Swoosh, swoosh. One figure after another descended from the sky, all of them flickering with surging Emperor's aura of white gold. Among them, there was even a sword chi that was close to the Emperor rank. In an instant, the Miao tribe and ghost martial artists who were engaged in battle were all surrounded in the center. At this moment, the Miao tribe and the ghost warriors stopped, including Hidden Blade and Granny Miao. They were all stunned in place. "Enslaving my mount, you've got guts." Qin Hao slowly turned around and looked at the stunned Miao Lang. His lips curled into a smile. "But before that, I need to get rid of the pirates I hate the most." Gulp. Hidden Blade swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Although he did not use his full strength just now, it was obvious that Qin Hao must have also stepped into the Emperor rank. Moreover, this person's tone was unfriendly, and the aura he exuded made Hidden Blade very disgusted. It was an inexplicable disgust. "Your Excellency, there seems to be no conflict between us, right?" Hidden Blade said coldly. Even though he was very disgusted with this person, he did not want to provoke another Emperor rank because it would not do him any good. Of course, there's a conflict that has lasted for thousands of years. Do you remember what a person from the East Continent once said? Those who invade my territory, although far away, will be killed. As soon as his voice fell, Qin Hao's water-wind god steps flashed. He raised his arm and pointed at the center of Hidden Blade's eyebrows. Endless light burst out from the fingertip. Golden finger, you are Qin. When Hidden Blade saw this, his heart was shocked. Then his eyes almost popped out. He pulled out the two knives on his back. His figure was like a rainbow, and he fiercely chopped toward Qin Hao with a roar. Lu Dao and Da Qin have been enemies since ancient times. Since Dend is shocked the four regions, the hatred had indeed lasted for thousands of years. Moreover, Hidden Blade's teacher had died in the hands of the Sunset War God. At this moment, he recognized that Qin Hao was a Qin. Naturally, he was furious. Leave no one alive. Showuk said, whoosh. Su Jin put the flute under his lips, and the notes jumped. A layer of invisible sound waves instantly sealed the whole fairy mountain. It became more and more exciting, like a magnificent war song, deeply stimulating everyone's divine soul. Even if Miao Lang and the others had their heads sucked into the flute, it also stimulated a crazy fighting spirit. Their arms trembled more and more, completely involuntarily. They were about to lose control and kill. The tyrant blade on Zhang Ye's back slashed down heavily. With one slash, it split the sea and broke the waves. The devastating blade qi radiated, like shooting streamers, and fell on the heads of the ghost martial artists. The ghost martial artists were angry and shouted in an incomprehensible language. They also angrily fought back. Their blade techniques were indeed fast, and their reactions and movements were also fast. However, the difference between them and Zhang Yi was that the Lu Dao blade technique was too delicate and flashy. The power of Zhang Yi's tyrant blade was vigorous and heavy. When the blade slashed down, immediately people were thrown off their feet. Those with lower cultivation were directly torn in half, and those of similar cultivation were vomiting blood. As for those stronger than Zhang Yi, there was only one wizard. However, this shaman had been badly frightened by Jiaoying. Seeing so many Qin people descending from the sky, he lost his composure. He did not hide his weapon and was loyal to his friends. He waved his skeletal staff and fled into the void, trying to escape. Soul Catcher. Su Jin raised his eyebrows slightly. The rules and emperors will merged into the sound of the flute. The sound waves enveloped the whole fairy mountain, and platinum musical notes appeared out of thin air, penetrating into the wizard's mind. Chapter 1737. Above the shaman's body, the emperor's light raged as the Xidagarba flower vines wrapped around his body tightly in an attempt to prevent the musical notes from entering. However, the musical notes penetrated the emperor's will and directly affected the shaman's mind. It was as if worms had crawled into the shaman's mind, gnawing at his Tao, intent, and soul. Die! The overlord halberd in Qin Yun's hand flowed with a sharp emperor's light as it rose into the sky. He did not bring the Xianyuan halberd with him to the East Continent. The battle with Hui Tong had made him realize that if one's cultivation level was insufficient, bringing a treasure was equivalent to giving it to others. He came to the East Continent to seek treasures, not to give them away. Even without the Xianyuan halberd, the overlord halberd that accompanied him had been tempered by Qi Ziqing, greatly increasing its power. Although the material was not at the level of an emperor weapon, with the support of the Tao intent, it was not inferior to an inferior-grade emperor weapon. At that moment, Qin Yun stabbed the halberd upwards as fast as an arrow. The shaman's emperor's will was weakened by Su Jin's soul manipulation. With a puff, the overlord halberd's emperor's light penetrated the layers of vines and penetrated the shaman's flesh. Qin Yun's Tao intent constantly blasted into the shaman's body as the laws of petrification corroded his organs. The shaman's screams were even more tragic as he was attacked by two emperors. Although Qin Yun was much weaker than him, Xiaohua was at the same level as him. The power of the soul manipulation constantly weakened his Tao intent and soul until Tsayogwa stepped into the sky and activated the Herculean bull fiend body. A resplendent golden light burst out from his huge fist. With a boom, the petrified shaman was smashed to pieces. His soul was also shattered as petrified vines fell to the ground. What a powerful group of people. Miaolang looked up as his heart palpitated. The shaman was impervious to poison and had extraordinary combat strength. Many of his family members had been severely injured by him. Even the ferocious Jiao Ying could only suppress him. It was unknown if he could kill him. This group of people who had suddenly appeared killed the shaman without any chance to escape. It was truly terrifying. Boom! Qin Hao's golden finger collided with Hidden Blade. The finger radiance shattered the blade radiance, and the sharpness forced Hidden Blade to retreat. Deep down, Qin Hao was shocked. He would never have imagined that 600 years ago, Dinda died in the God Burial Valley. 600 years later, Dinda's ultimate art would appear in this world once more. Moreover, Qin Hao's Tao intent wasn't any weaker than his. It would not be easy to win this battle. Hidden Blade's speed was indeed not something an ordinary person could catch up with. When Qin Hao saw Hidden Blade's speed, he couldn't help but praise him in his heart. Unfortunately, no matter how fast he was, he couldn't beat the fleet-foot stride. Qin Hao stepped into the air. It was as if he had traversed the world with a single step. There was no need to tear the space apart. His figure appeared below Hidden Blade in an instant and caught up with him in an instant. In a third flash, he was already standing on top of Hidden Blade's head. You can't escape. Water, wind, godly steps. Under the ghost mask, Hidden Saber's face tightened. Even a movement technique that he had painstakingly trained since he was young had no advantage in front of this person. Who was he? Qin Hao didn't care about what Hidden Blade was thinking. He clenched his fist, and terrible golden light rushed out from between his fingers. He looked down on the world, and a tyrannical fire blasted down. The red lotus demonic flame condensed into a fire dragon that roared and swallowed. The sky was dyed red. What an amazing Emperor's fire. Hidden Blade's expression finally changed. This person's combat strength was more terrifying than he had imagined. He was completely incomparable to the old woman who used poison. The 9 layers of Emperor's rings burst out with dazzling Emperor's light. Majestic Dilly circulated around his body. On Hidden Blade's 2 blades, Saber Chi and Lightning intertwined. At the same time, the 2 Saber Chi overlapped and condensed into a red and blue color. The lightning spread and tore the fire dragon apart. However, this strike also caused Hidden Blade to fall madly. I have indeed obtained the true teachings of Yu Jing. Unfortunately, my cultivation level is not high enough. I don't have the time to waste with you. Monstrous demonic flames burned on Qin Hao's body. The meteorite power in his body roared and directly swooped down. He was like a turbulent meteorite falling from the sky. The skies seemed to collapse with him, as if it was going to bury this part of the world. Damn it! Endless astral wind pressed down on Hidden Blade's face. The ghost mask cracked inch by inch and shattered with a bang. Suddenly, her hair danced in the wind. Her delicate and charming face showed some panic under the rage. Woman. Qin Hao did not use the fire eyes of 10,000 spirits. Hidden Blade was actually a woman. However, he would not stop because of this. The meteorite rules were still strong. The demonic flames of the Great Path roared. The distance between the two was getting shorter and shorter until the flames engulfed Hidden Blade and burned her will. UB asterisk starred. Hidden Blade raised her hands high. Her 2 slender hands held the 2 blades and pierced them into the flames. The 9 layers of Emperor's rings under her feet vibrated with powerful waves of light. She could not stop the pressure from above. Moreover, the temperature of the flames gradually burned through her saber chi. Her clothes gradually turned to ashes. The burning speed was very fast. As soon as she was entangled with Qin Hao, she was completely naked. After all, she was a woman. Even if she had cultivated to the level of Imperial Master and looked down on the world of Lu Island and trampled on countless men, when she encountered a stronger opponent and was powerless to resist, there was no doubt that a woman's weakness was exposed. Hidden Blade almost subconsciously threw away the two blades that she regarded as her life. She crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her eyes were full of tears of humiliation. She did not even have the courage to resist, let alone fight again. The only thing she could do now was to preserve what was left of her dignity. The meteorite of the Great Path continued to roar. The demonic flames pressed the petite figure back to the ground. The celestial mountain shook. Huge gullies split open on the mountain. The 10,000-year-old Dao tree at the top of the mountain tilted to one side and almost fell to the ground. At this moment, the battle had stopped. With Showuk's strength that was almost on par with the Swordmaster realm, and Su Jin's music suppressing and sealing, in less than 5 minutes, the Japanese warriors of Lu Island were either dead or seriously injured. None of them escaped. They were all subdued by Chun Wanqin and the emperors of the Divine Palace. In the field, as the demonic flames gradually dissipated, a woman with messy hair hugged her body tightly, let out low sobs. Hidden Blade's body was covered with a long robe. Her legs were exposed through the long robe. The spots of fire could be faintly seen. Even if her aura was not weakened by much, everyone could see that she had lost her will to fight. It's a woman. Yi Shuihan was stunned. He looked at Qin Hao with some confusion. This was not normal. Boss did not kill her. At this moment, Qin Hao was missing a jacket. His silver hair fluttered gently in the wind. He looked down at her and said, "Be my slave, and I will spare your life." This. Qian Ning looked at Qin Hao. Although Hidden Blade was not from the East Continent and was a Japanese woman, she was still a girl. Even if Qin Hao was the emperor, she was still at the 9th level of the consummate realm. Wasn't it too much of a waste? Many of the goddesses of the Divine Palace did not look too good. Li Chuji should have just killed her. Enslaving a woman like this was not a man's style. Chen Wanqin smiled. She knew that Qin Hao was not a man who lusted after women. There must be a reason for him to do this. Moreover, compared to Xiao Han, Hidden Blade was not too bad. She could even be called a beauty. However, she was still not comparable. "Qin, you deserve to die." An angry roar came from behind. A martial artist from Lu Island who was covered in cuts and bruises stumbled to his feet. He raised a sword and slashed at the back of Qin Hao's head. Hidden Blade was the supreme empress of the Ying continent. How could she be trampled on and humiliated by someone from the East Continent? Boom! Flames of the way burned. Before they could get close, the martial artist from Lu Island who raised the sword was turned into ashes behind Qin Hao. "You?" Hidden Blade clenched her clothes. Her eyes were filled with hatred. She wanted to tear Qin Hao to pieces. "You know that you can't escape. Even if you are lucky enough to escape, all your subordinates will bear the fate that they deserve because of you. This time, Lu Island should have sent all their elites to the East Continent, right?" Qin Hao laughed coldly. Lu Island was not like the East Continent, which was rich in resources and talents. It would take hundreds of years, or even thousands of years, to cultivate a martial emperor. If all the martial artists in the Relic Divine City were wiped out, Lu Island would not be able to recover for thousands of years. Chapter 1738. Shameless, despicable. Hidden Blade's eyes were red, and her body trembled with anger. She hadn't even used her full strength, but her clothes had been burned by Qin Hao. If she fought with all her might, she might have a chance to win. Burning her clothes was bad enough, but threatening her with the lives of her subordinates was despicable. However, what he said was true. Every ghost warrior here was a cornerstone supporting Yingzhou. Once all of them died, the vitality of Flowing Island would be greatly damaged, and it would not recover for thousands of years. Otherwise, she would not have saved the wizard earlier. However, how could she, a sovereign master, be a slave and be ordered around by others? You only have one chance. Qin Hao stretched out a finger, and the flame of the way burned on his finger. He threw it out casually. Except for Hidden Blade, the rest of the ghost warriors had no chance of escaping. As for whether Hidden Blade was sincere or not, he did not care. He only cared about the result. Run, don't worry about us. Another ghost martial artist shakily stood up, roaring loudly. Your courage is commendable. Qin Hao threw the flame of the Wei over. He had never been soft-hearted to the Wei people, and he did not have to force Hidden Blade to submit. I promise you. A suppressed cry came out, full of grief and indignation. Hidden Blade's body trembled violently, and blue veins appeared on her fists. She cried and choked. Spare them. I'm willing to be your slave. Plop. As these words came out, Hidden Blade's legs slowly knelt in front of Qin Hao. The strongest person in Flowing Island had finally given up her dignity as a sovereign in her heart. Qin Hao smiled with satisfaction, and the flame of the Wei that he threw out was annihilated. The space became quiet, and everyone was shocked. Was she giving up just like that? The great-grandmother of the Miao tribe was in disbelief. She had personally experienced how powerful Hidden Blade was. She was considered an expert among the sovereigns of the Five Realms. Who knew that her will would be so easily destroyed by Qin Hao? Including Yishui Han and the others, they did not expect this either. They looked at each other and sighed. Words of submission won't earn my trust. Qin Hao gave Chen Wanqin a look. Chen Wanqin understood and smiled. She stepped forward and helped Hidden Blade up from the ground. Then what else do you want? Like a wild cat whose tail had been stepped on, Hidden Blade couldn't help but jump up. She wanted to scratch Qin Hao's face. She was already so humble. Was this man a devil? Rumor has it that the West Kingdom's Miao people are proficient in the art of poisonous goo. The mother and child soul devouring insect can be said to be the best. I wonder if Elder can give me the honor of demonstrating? Qin Hao looked at Granny Miao. This? Granny Miao subconsciously looked at her clansmen. Although the mother and child soul devouring insects were not very advanced goo arts, it still depended on the situation. Planting goo poison on a hidden saber monarch level expert would consume a lot of poison. But what if he didn't agree? Granny Miao became more and more worried. She didn't want her clansmen to end up like the Wei tribe. If Qin Hao used her clansmen to threaten her again, the consequences would be dire. Moreover, Jiuying had called Qin Hao master. This Miao Lang had clearly offended this person. It's nothing. Don't mention it. Thinking quickly, Granny Miao showed an extremely kind smile. Even though her smile was very stiff, her movements were very practiced as she took out the goo worms that she had nurtured. In the next second, 9 layers of emperor rings appeared under her feet, shining with an extremely intense poisonous light. The terrifying poisonous power flowed through her body and entered one of the tiny goo worms. The goo worm immediately emitted a sky-piercing poisonous light, and the surging poisonous liquid seemed to be on the verge of bursting out, as if it contained the power to torment all living beings. After doing all this, Granny Miao's Dao attainment and Per Chi began to weaken rapidly, and 80% of her poison power was gone. She reluctantly handed over the 2 goo worms, one big and one small, to Qin Hao. Let her eat the small one, and you refine the mother worm. Thank you, Qin Hao said. He took 2 steps forward and pinched Hidden Blade's soft cheeks with one hand. He picked up the goo poison with the other and threw it into her mouth. You bastard. I don't want to eat it. Gulp. Under the man's strong hand, Hidden Blade's struggle and resistance were useless. Before she could taste anything, the goo poison went down her throat and merged with her soul. Seeing this, some of the severely injured ghost warriors cried loudly. Some clenched the soil under them. Some buried their heads. Their faces were full of humiliation. Cough, cough. You sneaky old woman. I won't let the Miao tribe go. I won't. Hidden Blade's 2 hands pressed tightly on her throat. She coughed violently. It was impossible for her to spit it out. How dare you be so arrogant? Granny Miao scolded sternly. She looked at Qin Hao with a serious face. Why don't you try to use your emperor's will to test it out? Okay. Qin Hao nodded. After feeding Hidden Blade the goo poison was immediately refined by him. At this time, he quietly used his emperor's will. The mother-child soul-devouring worm immediately took effect. He clearly felt that there was an inseparable connection between him and Hidden Blade. In Qin Hao's soul, there seemed to be another person's soul miniature. When his strong soul suppressed the tiny soul miniature, Hidden Blade, who was coughing, suddenly twisted her face and fell to the ground. She curled up and convulsed crazily. Her expression and the painful moans in her mouth were as if her soul was being torn apart. It's very effective. Qin Hao stopped the suppression. With this, he was relieved. With an emperor-level servant in the dark, this trip to the ruins to deal with the overlords of the Five Realms was an unexpected trump card. It would be more convenient for his next move. Chapter 1739. On top of the Celestial Mountain, the fruits of the way that had been nurtured by the 10,000-year Tao tree contained abundant will of the way. After a few days, Yi Shuihan and the others ate the fruits of the way and refined them. As for the remaining fruits of Tao, Qin Hao generously distributed them to Tsang Dao and Granny Miao. Tsang Dao had suffered many casualties and needed the fruits of Tao to nourish his emperor will. Although Miao Lang had trapped Jiuying for more than 10 years, he had saved its life. Verbal punishment was just to scare it. How could he really attack Miao Lang? Then, the team continued to advance deeper into the ruins. There were many opportunities in this ancient battlefield. After the overlords of various realms entered, they fought to be the first to plunder them. Many factions had disputes and wars broke out. The weaker factions were constantly eliminated and annexed. However, the teams that could continue to search for treasures were all accompanied by emperors. At this time, a huge team was moving quickly in a certain direction. Looking at them one by one, the team was clad in shining armor and was extremely disciplined. It was not difficult to tell from their attire and atmosphere that they were not ordinary sect forces, but the army of the Empire. It was the overlord of the western region, Jin Tao Sengoku. Jin Tao Sengoku was extremely powerful. In the western region of the East Continent, they were known as the #1 overlord. They had 2 emperors who had proven their Tao. In addition, the sovereign family had a supreme ancestor of the true self realm. For this trip into the god burial ruins, Jin Tao Sengoku had sent an emperor who had proven his Tao to lead the team. He was the brother of the sovereign family and a prince of the sovereign family, Jin Shun. Although Jin Shun's position was slightly lower than the sovereign family's, his strength was not inferior to his brother's. Moreover, those who were selected by him were all top talents of the warring states. It's just ahead. Uncle, look, it's an ancient city. A prince with an extraordinary temperament spoke and pointed ahead. Hurry up. Jin Shun, with a dignified face, released a majestic emperor aura. He did not hide his aura at all. From a distance, he could sense that there were many extraordinary true treasures here. He had to enter the city first to obtain them. However, when Jin Tao Sengoku's mighty army arrived at the city, Jin Shun suddenly raised his arm and stopped his subordinates from entering. His expression became especially solemn. This was a dilapidated ancient city. The city walls had collapsed, and on the scattered pieces of huge city stones, there were traces of yuan qi blasting through them. Even a city tower was only left with half of it. It was obvious that the city had suffered an extremely fierce attack a long time ago and was forcefully destroyed by someone. However, even after so many years, the city still exuded a heart-palpitating power. This power made Jin Shun feel uneasy. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Gusts of sword wind approached from afar, like a huge sword chi tornado descending from the sky, filled with surging sword intent. The tornado stopped in front of the city wall, and as the wind dissipated, a team of sword cultivators was revealed. Southern Sacred Sword Wind People. Jin Shun recognized him at a glance, but he was not nervous. It turns out to be His Royal Highness, Prince Chun of the Western Border Warring States Kingdom. I've heard a lot about you. After the people of the Wind Clan landed, Emperor Feng greeted them with a smile and cupped his hands. Wind Emperor, Prince Chun, I didn't expect to meet the two of you here. What a surprise. Immediately after, another team descended from the sky, and a middle-aged man wearing a long robe with a feathered crown on his head spoke. Lord Mingya, The Wind People stopped in their tracks. It was the team of the Celestial Cliffs, the overlord of the Northern Islands. "Are the two of you also going to enter the city?" Prince Jin Shun asked directly. The Warring States Kingdom Prince had never liked to talk nonsense with others. "Since we're here, we naturally have to go in and take a look." Lord Mingyu chuckled. "Then do as you wish. However, this ancient city is not simple. Everyone be careful." Prince Jin Chun waved his hand and led the team forward along the broken city tower. Originally, they wanted to stay for a while to spy on the situation in the city, but now that other forces had arrived, they had no patience. "Let's go." The Wind People and Lord Meng Yu exchanged glances, and the three teams entered the city side by side. Soon, there was the sound of fierce fighting. Not long after Jin Tao Sengoku, the Sacred Sword Wind People and the Celestial Cliffs entered the city. Another three forces arrived in the distance and entered the city one after another. The last team landed, and it was the Aquamarine Sacred Palace. What a terrifying sword will in this city. Showuk was the first to stop. He had always been proud of his sword way, but when facing the ancient city, he couldn't help but feel a strong pressure. His sword spirit told him that the city was very dangerous. It's not just the city. In fact, the entire city is filled with sword will. This is originally an imperial city of sword cultivators. Qin Hao said lightly, looking at the broken ancient city with a slightly weathered gaze. Today, he returned to this place after 600 years. The entire city is filled with sword will. Yi Shuhen's expression turned ugly. He wasn't a sword cultivator and didn't have Shou Wux's keen sword sense, so he couldn't see the gate of the city. But didn't Yi Shuehan mean that once they entered the city, every step they took would be suppressed by the sword will? After entering, you all have to be careful. Wherever I go, you will follow. With your cultivation, except for Wuk, no one can take a sword strike from the city. Qin Hao said solemnly. In his previous life, when he entered the God Burial Valley, he wasn't able to see through the secrets of this city. He could only rely on his instincts to sense that it was dangerous. Now that he took a closer look, under the effect of his 10,000 spirit fiery eyes, he could see countless sword lights floating above the city. Even the ground of the city was filled with broken swords. All of these swords were formed from the sword intent of cultivators. They were eternal and indestructible. From this, one could imagine how terrifying sword intent was. The owner of this city should have been a Nirvana realm sword emperor when he was alive, and the power of his sword way was definitely close to that of a god. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to maintain the sword will. Qin Hao didn't know what happened here. Today, he revisited Sword City. Firstly, Wuk needed to temper his sword Dao here, and there was a sword in the city that was a priceless treasure to all sword cultivators in the world. Secondly, one of the 9 elements of Desolate Era was hidden in the city, and Qin Hao needed to retrieve it. Many sword cultivators died in this city. I can hear the cries and anger of the sword. And Showuk patted his head, not daring to look inside. He didn't know if it was an illusion or a resonance with the sword will, but he could faintly see some scenes of sword emperors fighting. Although they were illusions, they were very real and very terrifying. Guard your mind, don't be affected by them. Otherwise, your will be taken away by the sword will, and you will die in the illusion along with the illusions. Qin Hao stared at Shou Wuk and warned him very seriously. Then, he stepped into the ruined city tower that was about to collapse. Wuk's sword heart was pure, and his sword will was also the purest in the world. Usually, the more a sword cultivator was like this, the easier it was to be affected. Qin Hao was also a sword cultivator, and his swordsmanship was top-notch. However, because his sword will wasn't pure, he couldn't see the scenes in Shou Wuk's eyes. Of course, he was just guessing. Flames flickered in his eyes. Qin Hao could clearly see the position of every sword will in the city, and he was extremely careful to avoid them. Behind him, the emperors of the Divine Palace, as well as Yi Shuehan and the others, all stepped in Qin Hao's footsteps and moved forward with extreme caution. After passing the city gate tower, the deeper they went, the stronger the sword intent in the air became. Everywhere they went, there were broken walls and broken swords. Many of the decaying buildings were filled with sword hilts. Qin Hao relied on the strength of his soul and wasn't affected by the sword intent. The others, because their sword intent was weaker, they weren't affected much. However, Leader Wu Kei walked with great difficulty. In his ears, he could hear the hoarse screeching of countless swords. They were like tidal waves, crashing into his mind wave after wave, each wave stronger than the last. Gradually, his forehead was covered with sweat, and the expression on his face was extremely frightening. The sword will of every sword is different, and they all belong to the Emperor level. There are no less than 1,000,000 sword wills in the entire Sword City. The masters of these swords when they were alive were all buried here. This is simply outrageous. Qin Hao's voice was very calm, but the words he said scared everyone behind him. 1,000,000 sword emperors were killed here. What kind of cultivation realm did they have? Gods could also be buried in the Valley of the Gods. Since ancient times, the residents of the city had probably died because they were involved in the War of the Gods. There are corpses. That is, Xiaoguo was stunned, and he gradually revealed a look of horror. How is this possible? Yi Shuihan suddenly stopped. On the side of the road, a person's head was pierced by a sword and nailed to a withered tree. He was wearing the uniform of the Southern Region Sword Sect. It wasn't just the Sword Sect. There were also sword cultivators from the Zhuiying Sword Palace, as well as martial artists wearing battle armor and people from the Sacred Sword Wind People. Some had their chests pierced by swords, some had their eyes pierced by broken swords, and some had their bodies cut in half. There were bloodstains everywhere, and their deaths were all different. It was extremely miserable. Junior brother Zhang Kai. How is this? Shouwak couldn't help but raise his head. He recognized the person nailed to the withered tree. It was a cabinet disciple of the Sword Palace. His name was Zhang Kai, and his talent in the way of the sword wasn't bad. In the past, he had single-handedly killed 3 demonic beasts of the same level, but he had only suffered some light injuries. Now, a sword had pierced through his head and nailed him to death in front of Shouwak. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that Zhang Kai would die in such a way. Shock, grief, and anger finally made Shouwak explode. His eyes were crimson red. He looked further away and found the bodies of even more disciples of the sword sect. There were also many sword cultivators from the Zhuiying Sword Palace. They had all died miserably. "Uncle, my uncle!" Roaring repeatedly, Shouwak didn't remember Qin Hao's warning. The sword will of proving Dao swept out wildly. He completely ignored Qin Hao's obstruction and shot forward like a sword. Makamanji must have also entered the Sword City. He didn't dare to continue thinking. Boom! The sword will of proving Dao exploded. Wherever Shouwak passed, the broken swords on the ground were scattered. However, as soon as he moved, the entire city seemed to wake up. Beams of terrifying sword shadows pierced through the space from all directions. They all focused on Shouwak, wanting to kill him on the spot. Seeing this scene, Xiaoguo and the others finally understood why the disciples of the sword sect and the other sword cultivators had died in such a way. Originally, everyone thought that they had fought with the Wind People. Now, it seemed that the two sides didn't have bad blood. They were killed by the sword will of proving Dao. Beams of sword light flew and assassinated, becoming denser and denser. At first, it was only the low-level Emperor sword will that was activated. As Shouwak went deeper and deeper, finally, Emperor-level sword light began to fall from the void above. Seeing the Emperor-level sword will whizzing over, Qin Hao scolded them for being idiots. He battled Dilly and opened his 7 palaces. He raised his fist and blasted out a tyrannical fire. The red lotus demonic fire burned the falling sword light into nothingness. Although it was the same level of sword will, because of its age, its power had been greatly reduced. Qin Hao is also not an ordinary Emperor-level sword will. The sword will of proving Dao did not pose any threat to him. What made him feel helpless was that Shouwak was like a raging donkey. He didn't listen to orders at all and couldn't be stopped. Swoosh! At this moment, a beam of platinum sword chi flew over from the opposite side. It was different from the sword will of proving Dao. This sword Chi's sword was very abundant. It had 9 emperor rings revolving around it. It fell towards Showuk, but it didn't intend to hit him. Instead, it blasted on the path he was rushing forward. Boom! Dust flew up from the desolate ancient path. The sword Chi wreaked havoc and slowly dissipated. The raging Showuk suddenly stiffened and stopped in place. The ancient city is very dangerous. Brat, do you want to die? Makamanji's flustered and exasperated voice came. After entering the city, a few outstanding disciples had died due to carelessness. Before he could recover from his injuries, he suddenly sensed Showuk's aura. It was really worrying. Uncle, you are fine. Showuk was pleasantly surprised. He had finally calmed down. Chapter 1740. See Luke Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The Supreme Sword. Emperor Li, Wuk, just now, I was betting with Lord Mu that you two would definitely come here. It seems that I won the bet. The sword will is everywhere in this city, and every step is dangerous. The deeper you go, the stronger the pressure of the way of the sword becomes. Now, even Lord Mu and I are trapped by the sword will, and every step is difficult. After passing through 2 more streets, you will be able to meet up with us. Come and join us. Swordmaster Hyun Ying's laughing voice echoed from not far ahead. Judging from his position, he should be with Makamanji. Uncle, Martial Uncle Hyun Ying, don't move. Chu-san and I will come over. Showuk's heart was finally at ease. He turned to face Qin Hao and smiled apologetically. When he thought of the Emperor's sword light that whistled through the void, he could not help but shudder. If there's a next time, I won't do anything, Qin Hao said with a cold face, although he himself did not believe this. The team continued to go deeper into the city. When they passed by Showuk, Qin Hao punched him in the chest. Showuk laughed hoarsely and followed Qin Hao obediently. Walking along the ancient road, the sword city was barren and dead silent. Only the sword was everywhere, as if it was sucked into the soul from a distance, making people feel a strong sense of threat. Moreover, the danger was getting more and more intense. Soon, after passing through 2 streets, Qin Hao saw the teams of Sword Sect and Jueying Sword Palace. In addition, in front of Makamanji and Hyun Ying, there were 3 other groups of people, all of which were not small. As the leader of the East Continent in his previous life, Qin Hao naturally recognized that the group of armored soldiers belonged to the west border, Jin Tao Sengoku. There is no need to mention the Sacred Sword Wind people. If he was not mistaken, the 3rd group should have come from the overlord of the North Border Islands, Heaven's Cliffs. Just like Makamanji, Jin Tao Sengoku, Wind people, and Celestial Cliffs were all stuck in place, not daring to move forward. They seemed to be suppressed by Sword City. Emperor Li, we meet again. It must be fate. Swordmaster Hyuning smiled. The sword will in this city is incomparably intense. Anyone who cultivates the way of the sword would be able to sense this place clearly. Naturally, they wouldn't miss out on exploring this place. Qin Hao smiled as he replied. On his way to Sword City, he had already anticipated that he might encounter the 2 sections. Uncle, Zhang Kai, and the others. Showuk's eyes were filled with sorrow. Sigh, I was too careless. I didn't have time to protect them. Makamanji sighed and blamed himself. Lord Mu, you don't have to feel too guilty. The Emperor's sword will in the city is intertwined like a net. It's impossible to guard against it. Thousands of sword master rules flew down. I couldn't protect the disciples of Sword Palace either. This is fate. Xianing shook his head helplessly. It was not just him and Mu Yunzong. The War Kingdom, the Wind Clan, and the Celestial Cliffs had lost as many people as the Jueying Sword Palace. None of the 5 Imperial Lords present had the ability to block the attack of thousands of Imperial Lord sword wills. Qin Hao raised his head and glanced at the void. In his field of vision, the dense flashing sword light above his head contained sword wills that had reached the sword realm of truth. Due to the passage of time, the sword wills had weakened. Therefore, Makamanji, Hyuning, and the 3 forces in front of them had been able to hold on until now. And Judging from the location of the danger, they had just stepped into the Emperor realm. There were hundreds of disciples in the five forces. With so many of them stepping into the wrong place at the same time, thousands of Emperor Lord sword wills fell from all directions. Not to mention 5 Emperor Lords. Even 5 more would not be able to block it. Uncle Moo, don't blame yourself. No one could have done anything. By the way, where are Palace Lord Yi and Emperor Luo? Qin Hao asked. When they entered the realm gate, the 3 sects had traveled together. They were attracted by the sword wills in the city and temporarily separated. I can't waste their time. Makamanji explained. The Arhut Palace cultivated physical skills, while the Night Net Palace cultivated the way of assassination. The sword wills in the Sword City were extremely pure. He could not drag Yi Ninghong and Emperor Luo together for the benefit of one sect. There were many treasures in the ruins. Who would not want to find more treasures that were more valuable to themselves? One could not be too selfish. I see. Qin Hao sighed. Yi Ninghong and Emperor Luo were right not to come. Otherwise, many of their disciples would have died. Sir, you have brought people into the city and have not been injured at all. Could it be that you can sense the location of the sword wills in the city? At this time, Jin Tao Sengoku's Prince Jin Chun looked back and forth with his sharp eyes. Qin Hao was emitting Emperor Lord Qi, so it was understandable that he was not injured. It was too abnormal that no one in the entire team was injured. To be honest, I can predict the danger, Qin Hao said calmly. The people of the 5 forces were stunned. Predict the danger? The Tao of divination? The Tao ancestor of the south has awakened from his slumber. Li Chuji is from the Tao sect, so he must have learned some superficial skills from the Tao ancestor. Feng Gaishi said coldly. How could it be so easy to divine the Tao of divination? That kind of heaven-defying power was not something that everyone had the talent to be a divination master. However, Li Chuji could bring people to walk freely in the city without getting injured. It was enough to make Feng Gaishi jealous. So you are a disciple of the Tao ancestor. I wonder if you could bring us along? Prince Chen's eyes were sharp. He did not ask for Qin Hao's permission. It was as if he was supposed to bring Jin Tao Sengoku. At this time, Meng Yizhu and the Wind Emperor's eyes were burning. If someone could pass through Sword City safely, they would not have to take the risk. They had used the flesh and blood of their disciples to test the waters. They had paid a great price to get here. However, if they went further, Prince Chun, Meng Yizhu, and the Wind Emperor would not be able to withstand the power of the Sword Will of Truth. Li Chuji's group came at the right time. Qin Hao looked at Prince Chun. His eyes were full of desire for treasures. Qin Hao could clearly tell what he was thinking. Meng Yizhu and the Wind Emperor were the same. Sure, the 3 overlords could not be underestimated by Qin Hao. Moreover, Prince Chen's power was very strong. In Jin Tao Sengoku's group, everyone's cultivation was not weak. They were the largest group. Coupled with the Wind People and the Celestial Cliffs, even if Makamanji and Hyuning were on Qin Hao's side, they would not have the upper hand. Qin Hao was not afraid. It was just that the sword will of Sword City was too threatening. If the 6 parties fought, the millions of sword wills in the city would be stirred up. Sayogwa and the others would not be able to bear the consequences. Thank you. Prince Chun clasped his fists. The sharpness in his eyes disappeared. He allowed a long sigh of relief. If not for the fact that his family members were also sword cultivators, he would not want to take the risk, especially after seeing the power of Sword City. You're welcome. Everyone, follow me. Qin Hao, Makamanji, and Hyuning looked at each other. They used their eyes to tell the 2 not to be angry. After all, it would not benefit anyone if they fought. Moreover, Jin Tao Sengoku's group was indeed very strong. Qin Hao was not confident that he could defeat them. The 10,000 spirit fiery eyes flashed. Qin Hao was in the front. Behind him, the 6 overlords formed a long dragon. Everyone was seriously following the footsteps of the person in front of them. It took 3 days for the group to safely pass through half of Sword City. At this time, the sword wills in the void and in the city truly possessed the terrifying killing power of a flawless sword sovereign. If not for Qin Hao taking the lead, even Makamanji and Prince Chun, the 5 sovereign realm experts, would not dare to take half a step forward. What a terrifying pressure. I don't want to come to this damned place a second time in my life. Yi Shuhin's trousers were soaked in sweat. He clenched his fists, and his fingers were dripping with cold sweat. Looking at the desolate and empty city, he felt as if the space was filled with flawless great emperors with sharp swords. Boss was right. No one could withstand a single strike from this city, not even Prince Chun of the Golden Wave Kingdom. In the group from the Holy Palace, Qian Ning and Wu Yu were greatly affected. The men and women from the Water Jade, Holy Kingdom, all cultivated water spells. They were born with the ability to control water. Even though they could not sense the sword wills, they could feel the pressure of the flawless Sword Sovereign. That pressure made it difficult for them to breathe. The space in the center of Sword City could crush their souls at any time. The Southern Region's Sword Clan, Juying's Sword Palace, Holy Sword Wind People, and the people from the Sengoku Kingdom and Celestial Cliffs felt the most uncomfortable. The whistling of the sharp swords echoed in their ears. It was as if countless swords had entered their minds. The more pure the sword way was, the scarier it was. As time passed, Makamanji, Hyuning, and the Wind Monarch's hearts started to become unstable. Their faces turned green and white. They were on the verge of losing control. Hang in there. We're almost there. Qin Hao said. The flawless king's spirit secretly mixed in the sound waves and pierced into everyone's minds. It expelled the negative influence of the sword wills. Everyone's minds were much clearer. That's right. We're almost there. Prince Chun breathed heavily. He looked up and saw that Qin Hao had brought him to a desolate manor. This manor was in the center of Sword City. It was very large. At that moment, a very strong sword wave pressure came from the manor. The power was very terrifying. Above the manor, there was a dazzling supreme imperial weapon. Prince Chun and the others knew that Qin Hao had not led them to the wrong place. The first sword? How sad. The manor's walls had collapsed. There were weeds growing everywhere. The two doors were rotten. A broken plaque hung under the eaves. It was impossible to recognize it. Only the words "First Sword" were left. It was as if it was telling the future generations of the manor's owner's glory. No one knew who the owner of the manor was, but he dared to hang up the first sword. Whether it was the first sword of Sword City or the first sword of the world, it was enough to show how strong his sword way was when he was alive. Unfortunately, no matter how strong his sword way was, he still died in the Valley of the Gods. Entering the manor, the architectural style was similar to that of the outside world. There were pavilions, corridors, gardens, and a huge martial arts arena. Everything reflected the style of the owner when he was alive. Of course, no one appreciated it now. Under Qin Hao's lead, a long line of people went straight to the main hall. You can move around freely. There are no threats in the manor. As Qin Hao walked, he reminded everyone that this place wasn't sealed by sword intent, because the manor itself was the most terrifying place in the entire Sword City. Prince Chun walked quickly. He quickly passed by Qin Hao. Not only him, Mingya, Feng Dizhu, Feng Gaishi, and the other people from the three major powers were also rushing forward. They saw the most terrifying and the most attractive treasure in Sword City. The main hall of the manor had been reduced to ruins, for swords floated in the air above the ruins. The devastating sword light seemed to be able to blind people. The majestic sword will lingered in the air, as if divine swords were in the air, intimidating this part of the world. The supreme swords. Feng Gaishi's face was distorted. No, it should be that they had surpassed the supreme swords of the outside world. The terrifying aura emitted by the four divine swords was probably only comparable to the legendary Sunset Divine Bow of the Sunset Battle God. Other than that, no words could describe their power. Attack! Without any hesitation, the Thearchs of the Wind People, the Battle Kingdom, and the Celestial Cliffs stepped into the air and reached out to grab the divine swords. However, they didn't even step out of the martial arts arena. Suddenly, three sword shadows shot out from nowhere. Almost as soon as the feet of the people who attacked left the ground, they were penetrated by the sword shadows. Their entire large body evaporated into thin air, leaving not a drop of blood behind. Chapter 1741. The sword intent penetrated their bodies. Their flesh and blood evaporated. Their divine souls disappeared, and not even their bones were left. This scene made the faces of the various forces present turn pale. Li Chuji, didn't you say that there is no threat here? Feng Gaishi turned around and roared. How dare he lie to them? Are you an idiot? There is no threat on the surface, but it doesn't mean that there are restrictions hidden in the dark. Qin Hao said indifferently. The Supreme Emperor sword hung in the air, and the strength of the sword intent made even his heart tremble. Anyone with a little brain wouldn't be stupid enough to act rashly. However, in front of a peerless treasure, one's ambition and greed would be magnified infinitely. Emperor Yuan probably also sensed the danger, but he still couldn't restrain his desire. The truth was just as Qin Hao said. There was no threat on the surface of the manor, but there was killing intent hidden in the dark. After the sword intent killed the three people, a terrifying and turbulent light emerged from the soles of everyone's feet. The ground of the martial arts practice field trembled frequently, and the stone slabs were lifted, producing rays of light. Thousands of rays of light weaved back and forth like long snakes, weaving into a mysterious and huge array diagram. Suddenly, the whole world in front of everyone was dazzling with sword light. Countless divine swords began to surround the martial arts practice field one after another, forming a huge sword circle, surrounding the 6 major forces in the center. All the divine swords pointed at the crowd neatly, and even the void was sealed. Sword formation. Makamanji's expression was incomparably solemn. Was it because someone rashly pulled out a sword that the manor's defense was triggered? Everyone be careful. These divine swords are extremely powerful. Don't move recklessly. Swordmaster Hyun Ing took a stance. The 9 layers of emperor rings flickered under his feet. Among the platinum sword rings, there was a sharp swordmaster's Dao intent. However, compared to the thousands of divine swords on the martial arts practice field, Hyun Ying's emperor light was like a firefly compared to the bright moon, insignificant. I have never seen such a powerful sword might. The pressure released by each divine sword is even more terrifying than facing an old ancestor. Uncle, what should we do? Family head, we are trapped. Jintao Sengoku, the Wind People, and the martial artists of the Celestial Cliffs were all in a mess. Anyone who fell into the sword formation and was pointed at by thousands of divine swords would feel their scalp tingle. Since Li Chuji brought us here, he has to take full responsibility. I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. You'd better break the sword formation, or... Feng Gaishi's eyes were cold. What do you think? Qin Hao looked at Feng Gaishi and said, try it. If you're not afraid of getting everyone killed, just do it. Nephew Feng, I advise you to behave yourself. Otherwise, I won't be polite. Prince Chen's face was tense, and his eyes were extremely stern. Don't be so shameless. My big brother didn't force you to come here. Moreover, the culprit who triggered the sword formation was you Wind People. Xiao said, you. Feng Gaishi was furious. However, seeing Prince Chen's pale face, he had to suppress the anger in his heart. Brotherly, do you have a way to break the sword formation? Prince Chen asked. The ancestral patriarch of the south had the power to reverse yin and yang. Li Chuji was a disciple of the ancestral patriarch and could foresee the danger, so he asked for his opinion. Prince, please wait a moment. Qin Hao heaved a long sigh and said to Makamanji and Hyun-ing, Uncle Mu, Sword Lord Hyun-ing, please use your sword soul to look at the sword. In terms of martial prowess, Qin Hao was confident that he was above the 2 sword lords. Even Prince Chun of Jintao Sengoku would not be able to withstand Qin Hao's full power. However, in terms of sword senses, Makamanji and Hyun-ing were definitely better than Dendi. After all, Qin Hao's sword will was not pure, and he had many sword wills. It was too impure. Okay. Makamanji and Hyun-ing nodded at the same time. They did not doubt Qin Hao at all. The emperor rings under their feet flashed, and they slowly closed their eyes. The sword souls in their bodies trembled and hummed. They instantly entered the state of one with the sword. Their spiritual souls seemed to condense into an illusory sword shadow and merged into the formation from the emperor rings under their feet. In just an instant, their faces turned pale and their bodies trembled slightly. They seemed to be enduring the pain of the sword while piercing their souls. At the same time, Qin Hao also activated the 10,000 spirit fiery eyes. 2 red flames flickered in his eyes as he scanned the vast sword formation that sealed the martial arts practice field. The 10,000 spirit fiery eyes had the ability to see the essence of things. Under Qin Hao's gaze, he could see how the sword formation operated and where the eye of the formation was at a glance. However, according to the cultivation of the manor owner, what Qin Hao saw might not be true. Therefore, he needed Makamanji and Hyuning to use their sword souls to sense the sword will in the formation. Then, they could work together to avoid any mistakes. 9 Eye of the formation. Soon, the 3 of them shouted these words at the same time. Then, Qin Hao smiled and said, "You guys go first." Makamanji shook his head. "The sword will of the sword formation is too strong. It is far beyond my ability. Through the senses of my sword soul, I can only vaguely feel that the formation is maintained by 9 Eye of the formation. My senses are similar to Lord Mu's. The sword Tao of the senior who set up the sword formation is unfathomable. My spiritual soul entered the formation as if it was swimming in the abyss. Even though I can roughly sense a few Eye of the formation, I don't know where they are." Hyuning said helplessly. "I feel the same as them." Emperor Feng interjected. As the sword emperor of the Wind People, he could not show weakness in front of Jueying's sword palace. Moreover, it was related to his life. He had tried. Not only Emperor Feng, but Feng Gaishi, Shou Wuk, and Feng Qinli also entered the formation with their sword souls. However, their sword Tao was much weaker than Makamanji and the other emperor lords. They could not see a single eye of the formation. I know the location of all the eye of the formation. Qin Hao chuckled and waved his palm in front of him. Buzz! The emperor's light of doctrine swept along the ground and left a cluster of Tao fire wherever it passed the eye of the formation. When the emperor's light spread throughout the entire martial arts arena, the eye of the formation appeared frequently. Everyone looked around and found that 9 clusters of flames were flickering on the ground, like burning candles. Yes, this should be the specific location of all the eye of the formation. How did you do it? Hyunying's sword soul merged into the sword formation in a short time. Compared with the cultivation of the manor owner, although his sword will was too small, like entering the abyss, that kind of feeling could not be wrong. At this time, as the eye of the formation appeared, it overlapped with the feeling in Hyunying's heart. I divined it. Qin Hao smiled mysteriously. You divined it? Makamanji looked at Shou Wuk. Was the art of divination so incredible? I don't know anything. Shou Wuk shrugged innocently. They had been separated for more than 10 years since they entered the East Continent. He did not participate in Qin Hao's experience in Dao sect. Since the eye of the formation has appeared, how do we break it? Prince Chen asked. He would not doubt Qin Hao's art of divination. After all, Uncle Changji was famous. If I'm not wrong, it should be these that break the formation. Qin Hao pointed at the ground under everyone's feet. On the broken martial arts arena, there were rusty, broken swords scattered all over the ground. This, Feng Qinli frowned. There were thousands of broken swords, big and small, but there were only 9 eye of the formation. Which one was the real one? I provided a way to break it. As for how to do it, it's up to you. To be safe, I'll take the lead. But to find the real 9 swords among thousands of broken swords to block the eye of the formation, I can't do it alone. Everyone could understand Qin Hao's words. Even if he knew the art of divination, he couldn't keep using it as it would consume too much of his divine essence. After all, it was said that divination defied the heavenly Tao and would consume one's life. While speaking, Qin Hao's eyes flashed with red lotus fire. He stared at a broken sword among the chaotic swords. He raised his hand, and the Emperor's light wrapped around the broken sword and steadily dropped it into one of the eye of the formation. In an instant, the ground under everyone's feet trembled and the flowing light dimmed a little. The thousands of divine swords that sealed off the martial arts arena also dimmed a little. It works. Feng Gaishi was pleasantly surprised. The effect of blocking one of the eye of the formation was minimal. It could not resolve the crisis of the sword formation. Now there are 8 places left. According to the distribution of the 6 teams, I'll take a loss. I'm responsible for 2 eye of the formation. Since I've broken one, I'll just need to break another one. As for the remaining 7 eye of the formation, I'll have to trouble you guys. Qin Hao said to Prince Chun and the others with a smile. All right. Prince Chun nodded with great difficulty. Along the way, Qin Hao had been supporting them alone. Now, that Qin Hao had found 9 eye of the formation and even broke one of them. No matter what, he could not force Qin Hao anymore. He had to have a bottom line. The Kim people of the Warring States period are not good at swordsmanship. Our sensitivity to swords is not as strong as yours. I'm only responsible for 1 eye of the formation. You guys should have no objections, right? Not making things difficult for Qin Hao did not mean that Prince Chun had to take on the big responsibility. The 5 major forces were allocated 7 eye of the formation. It was destined that someone would have to take on 2 eye of the formation. If they were not careful, they might lose their lives. The sword sect is willing to take on 2 eye of the formation. Makamanji said generously. The sword palace is the same. We'll take on 2 eye of the formation. The remaining 3 will be up to you 3. Hyuning said, I originally want to take on 2 eye of the formation. Since Hyuning said so, I won't force the limelight. I'll take 1 eye of the formation. Emperor Feng smiled like an old fox. Of course, he was satisfied with the result. Although the Celestial Cliffs is not good at swordsmanship like the Kim people of the Warring States period, we will not shirk our responsibilities. I will take on 1 eye of the formation. Lord Ming said righteously as if he had suffered a great loss. Everyone, let's do it on our own. I'm exhausted and need to rest. Qin Hao lifted his clothes and sat on the ground. He closed his eyes and ignored the situation in the venue. He said that he was exhausted, but in fact, he did not use much strength. With the 10,000 spirit fire pupils, he could easily find the real 9 swords among the thousands of swords. However, he did not want to do that because he did not want to see the Wind People's faces. As for Makamanji and Hyuning, it was actually Qin Hao's secret arrangement to take on the 4 eye of the formation. On the surface, they would pay as much as possible to look generous and qualified to take more. Because after the sword formation was broken, someone would definitely be eliminated. The one who paid the least would naturally be excluded by everyone. Buzz. Under Qin Hao's secret instructions, Zhong Yun was the first to take action. His gaze swept across the field of broken swords, and after sifting through them one after another, he finally decided on one. He stabbed the sword into one of the eye of the formation, and the light of the sword formation that sealed off the practice field immediately dimmed a little. Then, Hyuning took the sword in the same way as the swordmaster. However, the process was even more exaggerated. When his palm touched one of the swords, he spat out a mouthful of blood. It seemed that his soul was severely injured. Then, he picked the right broken sword with difficulty and stabbed it into the eye of the formation. The pressure of the sword formation that sealed everyone weakened again. However, the Wind People and the Celestial Cliffs were not so lucky. Emperor Feng and Lord Meng, you were not weak, but it was not easy to pick the right one out of the thousands of broken swords. It had to be compatible with the Tao will of the formation of the formation. It was not an easy task. Through the sensing of the sword soul, they carefully chose one of the swords. Emperor Feng did not insert the sword. He handed the sword to his clansmen and asked one of them to send it into the eye of the formation. As a result, the Wind People, Emperor Yuan, let out a miserable howl. As the broken sword under his palm shattered, His entire body was torn apart by the sword light spewed out from the eye of the formation. Chapter 1742. The Celestial Horizon Emperor was smarter. He didn't hold the sword himself. Instead, he used his Emperor Chi to send it into the formation. The sword light in the formation raged, and the rusty, broken sword shattered. Sword Chi swept over, and the Celestial Horizon Emperor also died. Whether it was holding the broken sword or entering from a distance, if the Tao intent attribute didn't match with the formation core, it would be devoured. Prince, the Arch-Elder of the Jin Tao Sengoku, was uneasy. He witnessed the tragic death of others, but he didn't dare to press the sword in his hand into the formation core. "Don't be nervous, I know what to do," Prince Shun told the other party with his eyes. "It's okay." Whoosh! The Jin Tao Sengoku Elder took a deep breath. The prince's cultivation base was at the peak of the Tao, slightly higher than the king. If His Highness said that it was okay, then it shouldn't be a big problem. He mustered up his courage again and again. His hand trembled as he pressed the broken sword inch by inch into the formation core. However, when the violent sword aura raged out, he realized that the prince wasn't reliable either. Buzz! The gushing sword aura dissipated, and the elder of the Sengoku clan also evaporated. "Uncle, this..." A prince of the Sengoku clan looked at him with an incomparably bitter expression. "In life, it's inevitable to make some mistakes," Prince Chin said calmly, but he didn't feel good in his heart. He tried his best. His emperor's will covered the martial arts arena. The broken sword he found was the closest to the Tao intent of the formation core, but he still couldn't break it. At this time, another Emperor Yuan of the Wind People died on the spot because he inserted the wrong sword. Wind and thunder dual attributes. 30 steps to the north, black tortoise position. Qin Hao closed his eyes and pretended to adjust his breathing. He secretly communicated with Makamanji and Hyun Ing via voice transmission. His emperors will activated a broken sword. Makamanji stepped forward, picked up the broken sword, and dropped it into the black tortoise formation core in the martial arts arena as instructed. Chi, the light of the formation core, dissipated. It was effectively blocked by the sword intent. At the same time, Hyun Ying's footsteps swayed, and he vomited 2 mouthfuls of blood exaggeratedly, blocking another square formation core. 5 of the 9 eyes of the sword formation had been destroyed. After finishing their jobs, Makamanji and Hyuning also learned from Qin Hao and sat on the ground to adjust their breathing. The fluctuating aura and the weakened Dilly told the other forces that they had suffered a great loss. "Father, what should we do?" Feng Gaishi said anxiously. 2 of them had died. Even though they weren't from their clan, they were rogue cultivators who had followed the team into the ruins. However, at this rate, they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Let's take a look at them first. Monarch Feng was able to keep his composure. He was an old schemer. Even if the Wind People blocked off one of the formation eyes, Prince Chun and Master Mengyaji would not be able to break the sword formation. However, the success of Hyun Ing and Makamanji made the Wind Monarch lose some face. They were all sword monarch clans and had cultivated the sword for generations. How could the Wind People's sword be inferior to the Juying Sword Palace and the Southern Region Sword Sect? They had broken 2 of the formation eyes, while he couldn't even break one. Wouldn't that let everyone know that he, Monarch Feng, was inferior to Mu Yun and Hyuning? It was really hateful and annoying. The sword formation is unfathomable. We can't sacrifice ourselves blindly. Uncle, the Prince of the Battle Kingdom, looked at Hyuning. The other party had successfully blocked off 2 of the sword formations. There was no harm in letting Hyuning deal with one more. Prince Shin understood and walked over, just as he was about to speak. "Your Highness, look, my uncle's sword spirit is injured, and he is adjusting his breathing." Feng Qinli didn't even give Prince Chen a chance to speak. He directly nipped the idea in the bud. Although he didn't know about the secret communication between Hyun Ing and Qin Hao, it was true that his uncle Dilly was weak. How could he let this guy disturb him? His uncle was the pillar of the Sword Palace, and he couldn't allow anything to happen to him. "I'm sorry." Prince Chen apologized and walked away. If he had any other choice, he didn't want to lower his face and beg others. Looking at Makamanji, Prince Chun continued to walk forward. "Senior, my uncle's soul is very weak. Can you share some of the Emperor's power with me? This junior will be very grateful." Shou Wu's eyes were filled with tears. His heartbroken expression was very moving. This, Prince Chen's eyes widened. He hadn't even asked for Zhong Yun's help yet, but instead, he wanted to ask for his Tao-proving power. There were many powerful cultivators in the ruins, and the various overlords were in a perilous situation. Every bit of Emperor's power consumed was undoubtedly a step closer to death. "Sorry to disturb you." Prince Chen walked away with a black face. He didn't care about Shou Wu's pleas. He raised his head and looked at the radiance of the sword formation. His face was filled with melancholy and helplessness. This trip to Sword City was a disaster and not a blessing. Maybe they would really be trapped here. "Prince, are you in trouble?" Qin Hao seemed to have adjusted his breath. He stood up slowly and asked with a smile. "Emperor Li, no, Mr. Li, are you all right?" When Prince Chun felt that despair was getting closer and closer, Qin Hao's voice suddenly opened the door of hope. At this moment, even the way he addressed Qin Hao was more respectful. "My body is not damaged, but I lost 100 years of my life. How can you say that I'm all right?" Qin Hao said sorrowfully. Hearing this, Prince Chun lowered his head deeply. Yes, the method of seizing fate was against the will of the heavens. Li Chusan had paid the heaviest price out of all of them. "Mr. Li, I know what life is to becoming an emperor, but if you don't help, I really can't do anything. In this way, no one can walk out of the sword formation. If you are willing to help, Jin Shun will remember your kindness. Sengoku will be your loyal friend in the future. If you need help, the Kim people will not hesitate." Prince Chen's expression was very solemn. Jin Tao Sengoku advocated absolute force. Except for strength, they didn't believe in anyone. Therefore, the Kim people never needed friends, nor were they willing to tie their family with others. But in the current situation, Jin Shun had to consider the people who entered the ruins. He owed Li Chuji a favor. Compared with the lives of his people, which was more important, he could weigh. "Prince, if I don't agree, I will really miss the opportunity of my life. Sengoku is responsible for the eye of the formation. I will solve it." Qin Hao laughed heartily. Sengoku was extremely domineering. He never used his hands, but if he used his mouth, he was absolutely trustworthy. "Thank you, Mr. Li." Jin Shin cupped his hands and said emotionally, "Sengoku, Kim people, thank you, Mr. Li." All the princes and experts of Sengoku bowed at the same time. From today on, Li Chuji, the Kim people would remember. Qin Hao smiled. Everything was in his calculations. He just wanted Jin Shen's promise. If he allowed Jin Tao, Sengoku, Celestial Cliffs, and Wind people to combine into one, the threat would be too great. Emperors will spread invisibly, shrouding the martial arts field. Emperor's rings flashed under Qin Hao's feet. Soon, his sword-like eyes accurately fell on a broken sword. He raised his hand and rolled up the broken sword, sending it to Prince Chen's hand. 24 steps south, vermilion bird position. Good. Jin Shin would not doubt Qin Hao. 6 forces safely stepped into the manor and made 9 formation eyes appear, including the first one Qin Hao broke. It fully demonstrated the ability of Li Chuji of Taoism. He waved his hand and sent out Emperor's light, wrapping around the broken sword and steadily inserting it into the vermilion bird position. Suddenly, the light of the formation faded, and the sword was sealed by the broken sword. The pressure of the entire sword formation began to weaken, and the light of the divine sword that shrouded the martial arts field dimmed a little. Mr. Li is amazing. A princess of Sengoku saw this and immediately became a fangirl. She looked at Qin Hao with eyes full of worship. Li Chuji was even more powerful than Imperial Uncle. "Princess, you flatter me. I'm just an ant. In terms of martial power, I'm afraid no one here can beat Prince Chen," Qin Hao said modestly. Jin Shin's cultivation had truly reached the peak of Taoism. He was even stronger than Emperor Han Tian and Ming Tao. Ha ha ha. Mr. Li is a wonderful person. Prince Qin was very pleased. He turned to look at Emperor Feng and Lord Meng Yeju. His face darkened slightly, and he said, "You two should hurry up and break the formation. You're wasting everyone's time. Aren't you being selfish?" "I won't break it too," Lord Meng Yeju shouted angrily. Before, Jin Shun was not in a hurry. He relied on Li Chuji's help to break the formation and force them to break it. Chapter 1743. Your Highness, it's easy for you to say that, the Wind Emperor said unhappily. He also wanted to break the array, but he couldn't. Wind people regard sword art as the best in the East Continent, and they've never been convinced by the Juying Sword Palace. Sword Master Hyun Ing has broken 2 array cores, but one shouldn't be a problem for the Wind Emperor, right? The Prince of the Warring States Kingdom sneered. You? The Wind Emperor was suddenly speechless, and he looked angry. If my father hadn't fought with someone before coming to Sword City and accidentally damaged his sword soul, he wouldn't have been able to break 3 or 4 array cores, let alone 2. Feng Gaishi found an excuse for his father. Stop pretending. Even I can't stand it anymore. If you can't break it, then so be it. It's not like you're losing face. Lord Meng Yaju sneered. At the same time, as the sword aura on the martial arts field weakened, Qin Hao broke another array core, fulfilling his promise and completing the task of breaking 2 array cores. Seeing this, Lord Meng Yaju went forward with a smile and said, "I'm not good at sword art. Can you do me a favor and help the Celestial Cliffs solve the array cores?" "Sure." Qin Hao nodded. Lord Meng Yaju was startled. He didn't expect him to agree so quickly. Makamanji, Prince Chun, and the others were also a bit surprised. Qin Hao closed his eyes, and sword chi surrounded him. As his emperors will spread, he suddenly opened his eyes and clenched his fingers. A broken sword in the distance flew out and fell into one of the last 2 array cores. In an instant, the sharpness of the tens of thousands of divine swords that sealed off the martial arts arena weakened rapidly. The swords were almost distorted in shape and became more and more transparent. However, the matrix did not completely dissipate. Although its power was weakened several times, it still had the will to kill everyone. "Thank you, Mr. Li." Lord Meng Yaju was very grateful. "Feng Junfei, there's only 1 array core left. It's your turn," Prince Qin urged. The Wind Emperor's real name was Feng Junfei. At this moment, the eyes of the 5 forces were all focused on the Wind people. Some couldn't wait, and some sneered secretly, as if they were looking at the Wind people as a joke. Feng Gaishi listened to the sniggering coming from the crowd from time to time. His fists gradually clenched. He had never thought that one day, the dignified, sacred sword Wind people would be surrounded like monkeys, waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. "Forget it. My cultivation is not good enough. Can I ask Emperor Li to do it for me?" The Wind Emperor said in a low voice. He was the leader of a clan, the dignified sword master of the southern border. To admit that his cultivation was inferior in front of a fellow sword cultivator was truly a blow to his dignity. "Sure." Qin Hao chuckled lightly, but before anyone could react in surprise, he continued, "However, since I'm acting on behalf of all of you, who should the Emperor artifact left behind by the manor's owner belong to?" The 9 array cores, not to mention Makamanji and Hyuning, Jintao Sengoku, Heaven's Cliff, and the Wind People, were all handled by Qin Hao alone. Even Makamanji and Hyuning were able to block the array cores because of his secret guidance. Now, the crisis that everyone was facing was about to be resolved. Who should the Emperor artifact belong to? As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's expression changed. Indeed, Li Chusan had led everyone into this place with his own strength. Since he could break the array by himself, why would he share the Emperor artifact with the other forces? "Li Chuji, you want to take the Supreme Emperor artifact for yourself?" Feng Gaishi shouted. He would never allow it. "I don't dare to take it for myself, but I have resolved the sword array, which is equivalent to saving your lives. Otherwise, You won't even be alive. Why do you have to stand here and speak? Qin Hao replied coldly. It's simple. Whoever contributes the most will have the priority. 4 Supreme Emperor artifacts, 1 for Mr. Li, 1 for the Southern Region Sword Sect, 1 for the Sword Palace, and as for the last one, Prince Chun looked coldly at the Wind Emperor Lord and Mengya Lord. The Emperor aura under his feet suddenly flew out, and the 9 Emperor rings shook the ground. He laughed and said, If you have the ability to take it from me, you could try to join forces. Voila! Jin Tao Sengoku's valiant lineup directly surrounded the sacred sword and wind people and the people from Heaven's Cliff. In an instant, the atmosphere became tense. The strength of the number 1 overlord of the Western region was unquestionable. After all, the Kim people started from killing. In this trip to the ruins, the number of family members was huge. Under the situation of 1 against 2, the momentum of the Wind people and Heaven's Cliff was suppressed. As Jin Shun said, even if they joined forces, he was not afraid at all. He would take the last sword. Jin Shinyu, the Wind Emperor, was furious. He raised his hand and grasped the void. The space was whistling, and a storm sword was condensed in his palm. The Kim people wanted to bully him, but the Wind people were not to be trifled with. The warring states of the Western region is really domineering. Mengya Lord said coldly. His squinted eyes suddenly opened. Wong, wong, wong. With a roar, a sacred mountain appeared in the middle of the martial arts field. It was condensed by Mengya Lord's will. With a thought, he could fall into the crowd of Kim people. You really have guts. Jin Shin laughed. He had not killed for a long time. It seemed that the East Continent had forgotten his frightening name, the Overlord of the Western region. The killing intent in the field became more and more intense. Seeing that the 3 sides were about to attack, Qin Hao's goal had been achieved. He stepped forward and said, Wait, it seems that you have forgotten where you are. If you want to fight, there will be plenty of opportunities, but not now. The last formation I can resolve it. But as Prince Chen said, I must take the last sword. As for the rest, it is not too late for you to decide. There was only 1 formation I left to maintain, the sword formation. The power of the formation was not something that the 6 forces could resist. Qin Hao also could not. With the will of the Nirvana limit, no one could survive if they fought in the formation. Chapter 1744. The Wind Emperor and Meng Yizhu dispersed the power of their will and looked at Jin Shun with a trace of hatred in their eyes. Jin Shun didn't care at all. Since ancient times, capable people had treasures. He had the right to take the sword. Then, as Qin Hao blocked the last formation the formation diagram of golden lines on the ground slowly disappeared, and the thousands of sword wills that sealed the martial arts practice field also completely dissipated. However, the atmosphere in the field did not ease with the removal of the crisis. On the contrary, the killing intent between the warring states, the Wind people, and the Celestial Cliffs grew stronger and stronger. They had no time to care about the 4 Supreme Emperor weapons. Jin Shin, what do you want? The Wind Emperor shouted. Feng Junfei and I are not your opponents in a one-on-one fight, but if we work together, you won't have it easy either. Meng Yizhu stood firmly beside the Wind Emperor. Among the 6 forces, only the Wind people were in the same boat. 2 against 1. Isn't that a bit unfair? Hyuning said. It has nothing to do with the Juying Sword Palace. If it's unfair, it's Jin Shun who bullied us first. The Wind Emperor stared at Hyun Ing and shouted, I think Prince Chun is right. Why don't the 2 of you withdraw from the fight so as not to hurt the harmony? Makamanji stood beside Jin Shun with sword light flowing around his body. Sect Leader Mu, are you trying to make things difficult for me and the Wind Emperor? The Southern region has no right to interfere in the affairs of the East Continent. Meng Yizhu said with a sullen face. Jin Shin's cultivation had reached the pinnacle. It was already troublesome to deal with him. If the Sword Sect and the Juying Sword Palace got involved, the situation would be very unfavorable. So what if I make things difficult for you? The Sword Sect of the Southern region would like to experience the so-called #1 sword of the East Continent from the Wind People. Showuk stood up and said. Behind him, Qin Hao smiled secretly. You think you're worthy? Feng Gaishi's eyes narrowed as he pointed his sword at the sky. 8 layers of Emperor's rings were released from beneath his feet. Surging sword will circled around his body. At that moment, the sky above the manor was stirred up by a gust of wind. A sort of storm appeared, enveloped in Emperor's light and shattered the void. It whistled as it fell towards Showuk's head. He had wanted to meet this person for a long time. Wong. Showuk's sword lotus bloomed under his feet, and Emperor's rings surrounded the sword lotus. He was in the 8th tier of the Wei proving realm, and his cultivation level was comparable to Feng Gaishi's. His sword lotus bloomed, and layers of sword chi gushed out. Strands of rule sword chi shot up into the sky above his head, forming a platinum sword river that blasted toward the storm giant sword. Everyone looked up. The void rumbled, and the sky was filled with broken sword auras. Feng Wuk was arrogant, but his strength was indeed impressive. The will of the great path of the gale on the giant sword was unusually fierce. Showuk's natural power of rules was constantly being annihilated in the gale. However, the sword catastrophe lotus did not stop growing. Endless sword chi shot up into the sky, and the sword river did not weaken. The new direct disciple of Shadowless is more talented than Feng Qianli. Looks like it's true. Emperor Feng's expression became more serious. Wind People's sword will of gale was not something that anyone could resist. Feng Gaishi was known as the strongest swordsman in the East Continent. When he used the sword will of gale, even Feng Qianli would not be able to resist it easily. However, Showuk blocked it as soon as he made a move. The sword will released from his body was so strong that it was comparable to Feng Gaishi's. He withstood it? Feng Gaishi was slightly shocked. His sword attack was not simple. It was usually enough to suppress people at the same level. He originally wanted to crush Showuk with one attack and make him feel inferior. Unexpectedly, his opponent's sword was not weaker than his. Don't tell me that this is the only attack you know. That's really disappointing. Showuk's long hair fluttered in the wind. He formed a sword spell with his hand and pointed his finger towards the sky. Thousands of sword lights merged into one, and the sword will of gale immediately condensed into one, releasing an unparalleled sword chi. With a boom, the sword will of gale was shattered. 10,000 sword unification. More than 80% of the martial artists present understood the way of the sword, but there were not many who could achieve the flawless sword realm. The sovereign Tao intent could split and combine freely. It was no longer as simple as 10,000 swords returning to one. It required the support of an extremely powerful sword soul. Gaishi, be careful. This is not as simple as 10,000 sword unification. Emperor Feng felt that there seemed to be a powerful sword chi in the air. It was as if it carried the profound meaning of the great Tao. He could not underestimate it. You are indeed the sword master of Wind People. My sword sex attack is called. Makamanji smiled. Borrowing sword from the heavens. Showuk shouted. His long hair hung down. His sword spirit resonated with heaven and earth. The sword lotus under his feet spun rapidly. Layers of sword chi rose into the sky and merged with the great Tao of swords. This sword seemed to have come from the 9 heavens. When it flashed in the air, the entire sword city was shaking. Break for me. Feng Gaishi raised his head and stared at the sky. The pressure made him feel a sense of danger. He quickly formed seals with his hands. The sword spirit of gale in his body roared. He pointed his finger in the air. Wong. A sword Tao hurricane flew out and condensed into a divine sword of wind. It wanted to compete with the sword from the heavens. All the cultivators present were shocked. The Tao will of gale and Feng Gaishi was extremely majestic. They could faintly feel that they were comparable to Sword Tao, sovereign lords. It was truly terrifying. Sec Master Mu, your nephew has amazed me. Prince Chen praised. It was an extraordinary thing to fight with Showuk in the current generation of Sword Tao. Showuk could not only compete with Feng Gaishi, but his sword aura could also suppress his opponent. There was no other person with such strength in Jin Tao Sengoku. Moreover, Showuk obviously did not use any killing moves, because the sword art of Zhuang's Sword Emperor had not appeared yet. Mu Yunzong laughed heartily. Ever since his nephew was born, no matter where he went, he had always been praised by everyone he met. Even in the East Continent, where geniuses gathered, his flawless talent did not lose out to the so-called #1 Sword Dao Emperor clan. This sword aura, can you do it? Hyuning asked quietly and looked at Feng Qianli. My realm is not enough, Feng Qianli said. Even if you reach the 8th tier of Dao validation, you won't be able to use this kind of sword aura. Hyuning rolled his eyes at Feng Qianli. He had watched Feng Qianli grow up in diapers. How could he not know how strong his nephew was? Feng Qianli was extremely embarrassed. It was good that his uncle understood. Why did he have to say it out loud? There were so many people. Did he not want to lose face? Boom! At this time, the two sword auras of the Great Path, one above the other below, finally collided. The terrifying sword aura raged in the void. Everyone felt as if heaven and earth were colliding violently, and the world was about to collapse. The warriors with low cultivation groaned, and their faces turned pale. It was as if their souls had been hit by a sword. The blood in their bodies was tumbling, and their emperor bodies had a tearing feeling. You just SOSO. Showuk and Feng Gaishi's Dao validation sword were completely intertwined. They both knew who was stronger and who was weaker. As the two sword auras of the Great Path shattered and dissipated at the same time, Feng Gaishi couldn't help but take 3 steps back. His emperor will suddenly weaken by 20%, and a trace of blood slowly flowed down from the corner of his mouth. On the other hand, Showuk looked as if nothing had happened. He returned to the team with a bit of disappointment on his face. He was indeed disappointed. He thought that the top sword cultivator of the East Continent was very powerful, but in fact, Feng Gaishi was not much stronger than Feng Qianli. He was probably at the same level as Lei Jiao and Zhou Wudao. He could slightly suppress Feng Qianli, and his laws were more turbulent. Chapter 1746. Let me remind you one last time. Bearing the Supreme Sword will is a risk to your life. No matter what happens in the process, don't let your determination waver. If you have a firm Dao heart, you have a chance to succeed. If you waver, you will die. Qin Hao looked very serious. He was not joking with his life. Makamanji and the others nodded. They understood the logic. The moment they entered the realm gate, everyone was prepared to die. The burial god relics were destined to affect an era. If they did not lead their sect and family to become stronger, once others obtained great power from the relics, the 4 overlords would decline sooner or later and leave the stage of the era. Now that they had come to the relics, they could only press forward. Sect leader Mu, you and what go first? Prince Chun and I will protect you. After that, it will be our turn to take the swords. Hyuning said. Feng Junfei and Meng Yuzhu had withdrawn from the fight for the emperor weapon, but it did not mean that they would attack secretly. If the 4 of them took the sword at the same time and the opponent attacked suddenly, Qin Hao alone would be in trouble. Okay. Sword rings bloomed under Makamanji's feet, and the majestic sword was swept out. What? Take this with you. Qin Hao took out the great void cauldron. The pocket-sized purple gold cauldron fell into Showuk's hands. Showuk looked at Qin Hao and was stunned. He did not think much and put the cauldron into his clothes. Although he did not know what the cauldron was used for, Qin Hao would not harm him. Success or failure, life or death, it all depends on your luck. After doing all this, Qin Hao could only wait silently. It was very dangerous for a martial emperor to bear the Nirvana Heavenly Emperor's Dao will. The golden sword radiance also contained a streak of barren elements. Only a real divine item could suppress it. Qin Hao injected a streak of tranquil water into the cauldron, which could strengthen Wuk's spirit. If it was not enough, Qin Hao would immediately save him if there were signs of failure. Buzz! Two clumps of sword intent raged, and a sword spirit appeared above Makamanji's head. It was his natal Yuan spirit. Showuk also released his Monarch spirit. The sword Calamity Lotus under his feet spun, and both of them stared at the supreme Monarch weapon in the sky. With their divine souls as thoughts, they instantly entered the Monarch weapon. In an instant, the peerless sword might press down, and the descending nirvana energy seemed to want to annihilate them on the spot. Enduring the intense pain, Makamanji and Showuk's eyes were incomparably resolute. Wong. As their soul consciousness entered the sword, they saw the figure meditating within the sword. Was this the manifestation of the nirvana Tao will of the Emperor Weapon's owner? Makamanji and Showuk's wills kept closing in on the figure,